Oh, they're both here.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome.
Good morning.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District on February 8th, 2014, and it's 8 o'clock on the dot. Michael, do you have some announcements?
I do. Welcome to the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District Board of Directors meeting for February 8th, 2014. Director Epstein will be participating via conference call, so all motions and voting must be accomplished via roll call format. We are live streaming this broadcast at KMPUD.com. Viewers may make comments by emailing to msharp@kmpud.com, and the board will respond at appropriate intervals. Besides Director Epstein on the phone, we have our Out Valley Project Manager, Michelle Gamble, and our electrical engineer, Dave Wrightley. In the audience, I'd like to welcome Peter Forrest with KCP, and Carolyn and Cheryl. And with that.
Great. Peter, would you mind calling the roll,
Sure.
please?
Rickard?
Here.
Andy?
Here.
O'Grady?
Here.
Dornberg here. And Epstein?
Epstein here.
Okay, we got a full board.
So item number 4 is oral communication and public input. This is the time when there's an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on non-agenda items relating to the district. We can't take any action on matters not appearing before the agenda. We've got 3 members of the audience. Anything you want to raise? Not at this time. So hearing none, we'll move on to number 5, which is corrections to the agenda or consent calendar. Michael, do you have any?
I have none.
Any other members of the board have any? So hearing none, we'll move on to adoption of the consent calendar. Any item can be removed in order to be discussed. Does anyone have any items they'd like to remove for discussion?
No, I'd like to move adoption of the consent calendar. I'll second that. Andy? Rickard makes the motion. Andy seconds.
So all in favor?
Aye. Rickard, aye. Andy, aye.
O'Grady, aye.
Dornberg, aye.
Epstein, aye.
So item 7 doesn't apply because nothing's been brought forward, which leaves us with item 8A, new and unfinished business action items, discussion and possible action regarding the design timeline, bidding process, and construction activities associated with the Out Valley Power Line project. Michael, we'll start with you.
Today we have 6 agenda titles regarding the Out Valley project. First, Michelle Gamble will go over our overall update and the results of an important meeting we had with the United States Forest Service recently. Then Michelle and I will go over the current cost projections of the project and recap how the various proposals have come in as compared to the engineer's estimate. I will then update the board on funds available and the bus supplemental load. Dave Wrightley is on the line to go over the exponential change order, which was discussed at the last meeting. Then we will discuss 3 owner-furnished material proposals that are before the board. One for the KM Blue reactor, one for the KM Blue switchgear, and one for the KM Green steel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle for the overall update.
Well, good morning. I appreciate you allowing me to attend today via conference call. This past month, we've been spending a lot of time getting the KM Green substation and KM Blue substation out to bid. That happened earlier this week. As of yesterday, we had 9 pre-qualified bidders request plans. We've actually got the pre-bid meeting scheduled for next Thursday. We'll be up at the district allowing any contractors who want to come up and take a look at KM Blue during the pre-bid to attend. All other contractors who want to bid will be required to participate via conference call or in person, so it is a mandatory pre-bid. We followed up with Wilson Construction regarding the possibility of starting construction earlier. That was one of the items that we had discussed at the last meeting, just due to the mild nature of the winter. With the recent snowstorms, I was actually attempted to get to the KM Green site last week, and it was impassable. There is snow on the road, and even with a four-wheel drive, we were not comfortable with the condition of the roads up there. That was one of the concerns that Wilson had expressed. They didn't want to get mobilized and then get wintered out again. Additionally, we've talked with them, and I've talked with Dave about what work could we actually do earlier in the season to try and help us out later in the season. The project, as you know, we've got a lot of owner-furnished materials, and we've timed the delivery of these owner-furnished materials to match when the construction activities are most likely going to occur. So we've got steel poles scheduled for delivery for the 115 in April, and the 34.5 poles aren't coming in until May. We're currently finishing up discussions with Crux, who is the subcontractor who's going to be doing the micropiles. They have a component of the bid that they've provided where they have to provide us their design on these micropiles. These are very specific. So we're in the process right now of reviewing that, and we've got a meeting set up with PG&E on February 19th with Crux and with Exponential. Those activities dictate the schedule to a great degree. So the only thing that Wilson would be able to do if this mild winter continued would be to excavate for the 34.5 kV line. The challenge that we run into with that is the spotted owl LOP actually begins March 1st. So with the weather right now and with these other limitations, it doesn't make sense to try and get Wilson out on site to dig a couple holes prior to March 1st. And right now, the site conditions aren't even looking good for them to do that. So what we've done, that leads us into the next discussion. Michael mentioned an important meeting that we had with the Forest Service. Earlier this week, Joanne Michaels from my office and myself met with the Forest Service. We had a couple items couple of reasons for this meeting. One is we're required to have a pre-operations meeting prior to the start of construction. So we achieved that. We gave them an update on what we accomplished last year and then what we our anticipated schedule for this year. But what was really critical, we have a couple items this year for construction that are of concern. One, of course, is the spotted owl LOP. The other is due to the lack of moisture that we've had, we're concerned about the fire danger that we've had. Last year, as you're all well aware, we had a number of what the Forest Service characterized as EV days, and those limited or prohibited the work that we could do on the project during those times. With the spotted owl LOP, that goes from March 1st to March 1st to August 15th. Once we can start working on the 34.5, we're at the peak fire season for the project. And so what we wanted to do was talk with the Forest Service and say, what sort of relief or mitigation can we do? And can we talk about and plan early on in this construction season to really minimize any sort of stoppage that we might have with the project. And the Forest Service, I again have to say, they've been tremendous to work with. They're really partners in this project, and I think we're really fortunate that we've got the team with the Forest Service working on this project that we do. With the spotted owl LOP, what they're considering is we presented them a letter back in December, and a part of that letter was, we asked for a total listing of the LOP, which probably isn't feasible from the Forest Service's perspective. However, we've given them, there are some certain areas along the power line that are not really good spotted owl habitat due to the lack of trees, lack of old growth forest. And so the Forest Service is considering assisting us in doing a very intensive survey, much greater than what we've done before, looking at it tree to tree and seeing if we can release portions of the power line for work outside the LOP, which would really be helpful because then Wilson could get in and get excavated along the 34.5. We just need to time it so that they minimize their mobilization. We wouldn't want to have them come in and excavate and then have to demobilize and then come back after August 15th and finish up the power line. So once we hear back from the Forest Service what they're willing to work with us on, we'll work with Wilson and we'll establish a workable schedule that gives Wilson some relief on the LOP and also gives us some flexibility if we end up having some EV days. Before I go on to the fire, is there any questions on the LOP?
Any at the board level? Any questions or comments from the audience? Michael?
One comment is, one of the things that we asked the Forest Service is that if they could, we're looking primarily on the boundaries of the LOP, as we talked about in operations and capital. We also asked if the boundaries of the timeline possibly, get a couple of weeks in August or get a couple of weeks, on either side of it. And they basically responded that if they lifted a provision or a section of the LOP, it would be for the entire period, which is important because of that double mobilization charge that Michelle was talking about. If we had just received 2 weeks in August or the month of July or something, we wouldn't be impacted with that. It's our tendency to want to get in there as quickly as possible, but we have to be careful not to have equipment waiting for the rest of the LOP area to open up to allow us to excavate those areas. So it's going to be a double-edged sword there that we work with once we find out what the Forest Service actually allows us to do. But I think it was extremely productive, and the biologists and the Forest Service sounded very willing to work with us on lifting portions of the LOP, and very important portions close to the substation and on that bank going up from the reservoir. As we looked up the bank during our site inspections, you all saw that there's not many trees or anything, and there's roads in that area that have traffic and prohibit the nesting of owls as well.
When do you think you'll know what our flexibility with the LLP, limited operating period, is?
Well, we're going to do our owl surveys in March, and the biologist in Rich Hopkins is going to be discussing this. In fact, we'll probably have a follow-up meeting with Lawrence Crabtree, the new supervisor, in Placerville within the next couple of weeks to discuss this further and to get their viewpoints on doing this massive survey, which is actually the Forest Service going out on a quarter-mile buffer on either side of the line and actually going tree to tree like Michelle was. So this is actually the Forest Service going out, and on one end, our surveys are hoping to find, a spotted owl. Because if we find it, then the whole range narrows to a buffer zone around that nest. However, with the survey for the Forest Service, actually, it could go either way, but if they don't find it, that makes them kind of feel like they could lift the LOP, at least in those areas. I think it's important to note that 3 of the 5 years that we've conducted owl surveys, we haven't heard anything. And an owl survey is these specialists go out into to the forest with their iPhones, which has an app that sounds like a spotted owl hoot, and they broadcast that through an acoustical system and then listen for mating calls. This is the technology that we're dealing with. So for 3 of the 5 years, they haven't heard they haven't heard any hoots. In 2012, they thought they heard a hoot, and 1 year they definitely felt that they had a hoot. So,
Michael, what is the Forest Service charges for this survey?
for the extensive relay, I don't know. They did not. They didn't say they'd actually do it, and they didn't tell us what the cost would be. But we're optimistic that they will actually perform it, and then we can get a cost at that time as well.
Right, and if I could add that currently the district has a cost recovery agreement with the Forest Service, and the district has paid, they paid a certain amount for work in 2013, and then they'll have another payment that is going to come due for 2014. And what the project manager at the Forest Service indicated is for the work in 2013, they ended up having about $20,000, I believe was the number they threw out, left over. So they're actually doing really well on their budget from what they had anticipated and what's currently on the overall costs that the district anticipates. So we're feeling if we have to do this additional survey, what they're talking about is, a couple days of a field person, or a couple evenings of a field person out there looking at this stuff, and it's probably going to come in under what they had already anticipated spending. One of the other important things we discussed with the Forest Service is the fire restrictions. And last year, as we were starting the underground project, we had this issue with trying to get a variance and all the back and forth, and we were able, as the project progressed, provide the Forest Service with a comfort level about how our contractors were working. And the Forest Service was really good in granting us, exempting us essentially from the PAL, the Project Activity Level system that they have for the underground project, which allowed our underground contractor to work on those EV days. What the Forest Service is willing to do is to look at all of our construction activities that we have remaining for each different project segment and different work segment within each one of those projects. Like with the power lines, we have excavation, we have tower construction, we have wire stringing, and those are distinct activities. So we're writing up a description of the different activities by contractor and what the contractor will be doing, the equipment they'll have on site. And we're going to be providing that to the Forest Service in the next month so that the Forest Service can look at that and say, well, when you guys are doing this activity, we can exempt that from the PAL system. Or when you're doing this activity, we're going to want you to have a water truck on standby for those areas where we can have a water truck accessibility. So we're really pleased that the Forest Service is allowing us to look at the project components, not just a blanket, you must fall under the PAL system and be subject to these ED days. So the good thing is later on in the project, we have less activities that are likely to start a forest fire. We're not going to have welding. We're not going to have a lot of earth-moving activities on the overhead, which is the most vulnerable part of the project at this point. So again, the Forest Service is really assisting us. As Michael said in the meeting, we all have this goal to get in and get out. We want this project done as quickly as possible. We don't want to go over into 2015, so let's make sure that we do everything we can to make sure it's completed in 2014. We continue our meetings with PG&E, and we've been working with PG&E on one of the most critical items are the clearances that are requested. We've presented that to PG&E. PG&E has submitted that to their operations people. We expect to hear back from them in the next couple weeks if they have any issues with any of the clearances that we requested or any of the clearances that PG&E has requested. And we're trying to coordinate those with PG&E so we can minimize the number of outages that we have during construction. I attached an updated project schedule. We've coordinated our schedule with PG&E's schedule so that as we're getting towards the end of the project and we require, testing and inspections by PG&E people, that we've provided them adequate notice as far as what we anticipate and what their needs are to make sure that they can meet our schedule. So with that, I think we're going to talk about some of the other items and other agenda items. So with that, I'll see if there's any additional questions.
Any questions for Michelle? Any questions from the audience for Michelle?
I had one. It's Carolyn. If we find one owl, does that mean there aren't any others? There's only one? You said they'd lift the restrictions?
Typically with the spotted owls, there will be one owl in each protected activity center. So the Forest Service feels, based on all of their biologists, what they've said is that if we find one owl and we're dealing with one pack, that there's not going to be other owls. They're very territorial, so there won't be other owls in that area.
All right.
I've never understood whether we want owls or not. You want an owl? Anybody know any owls? So that's 1A, no action necessary?
No, just a couple other comments. During our meetings with the Forest Service, we were just brainstorming what we could do to alleviate the concerns for fire danger during EV days. And I reminded the Forest Service that we have a very capable fire department and that The idea actually came across dropping a line and a pumper truck so that just in case in some of these remote areas that we could actually have a water source right there. They also asked, and we confirmed, that all of our helicopters have the ability to bucket water out of Bear River Reservoir. So I think this gave the Forest Service a measure of comfort that we would, we'd go to extraordinary lengths to be able to get variances on these EV days. Because I think when Standish asked at the last meeting what are our major concerns, I think the two things that came up was the LLP and the EV days. So I think this meeting helps give us some sort of comfort on those. Additionally, with the PG&E, we're going to have additional meetings with them next week. Harold Taylor has asked for a meeting with Michelle and I on Friday of next week. We're going to be talking about communications with our engineering teams and their cash forecast.
Is there any?
So Michael, this is Bob. Do you think it's good news that they don't want me at that meeting?
Actually, yes, I do.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, I think it's good news that they asked that they didn't want board members, they didn't want a bunch of letters, they didn't want me to take this up to the next level. I thought that was...
This is regarding their possible overage of costs. Is that what this meeting's about?
Yes, sir.
$1.2 million.
I know.
Is there anything we can be doing, or any incentive we can provide, or anything that the Forest Service wants that we're not doing?
No, and that's a really good question. I kind of went into this meeting with my, arms open. What do you want? Because we have to be done this year. So EV days, LOP, what can we do? What over and above measures could we do to give you the confidence to either lift the LOP or lift the restrictions on the EV days? And I think they took us well. And bringing it up to the next level, Lawrence Crabtree, is a good sign as far as the Forest Service and getting these. And we'll walk into that meeting as well with open arms.
Anything else on 1A? So 1B has to do with Out Valley expenses to date and forecast through the end of the project compared to plan. And I think that's you, Michael, again.
Yeah, Bob, I'm going to be showing something on the screen, but we've emailed you all this information. We're going to start with the
I
Out
have it in
Valley.
front of me.
Okay, great.
But I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just tell me which file name.
Yes, sir. Bob, we're going to start with the Out Valley overall forecast of 2/7/14. And then I'll mention it when we go on to the construction forecast and then the consultant forecast.
Okay.
Today we'll be looking at 4 different spreadsheets. These have been transmitted to the board members, but we also have hard copies for you.
Thank you.
So we'll take this agenda topic in 2 parts. First, Michelle is going to go over the Out Valley overall forecast, how the construction bids have come in against the engineer's estimate will be the second file, and third, how the electrical engineer's proposals have come in against previous estimates. Then I'll be going into an update on the Russ supplemental loan. So there'll be an update there, and actually goes into a cash forecast as far as the expenditures and remaining funds. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle. And Michelle, the board is looking at the Out Valley overall forecast.
Perfect. To start with, from what was presented in the last meeting, the expense to date column, what I wanted to show in that column, I've updated it not only to include the items that have actually been expensed, but the POs that have been issued for the owner furnished material. That money is, they're not checks that the district has written, but there's money that's been section of the spreadsheet, you'll see items for the overhead and the KM Blue and KM Green construction. And those items include that OSM, so the payment for the POs for the transformers and the other OSM. The items that have changed in the forecast as of 2714 column, I apologize, I'm looking at a hard copy, so I can't give you line numbers. But I'll start under the project management, design, and completion, the middle section. For the completion of design, EEC, the forecast as of 2714, you'll see a number of $532,710,000. That anticipates approval of the change order. Now, I realize that the change order was reviewed, but it has not been approved. But I wanted to show those costs here to represent what would happen if the board did approve that change order. The next items are during construction management and observations. For the underground line construction, there's a number of $10,688,671. That includes the change order that was approved at the last board meeting. And then we have the highlighted items for KM Blue construction and KM Green construction. Those numbers have changed slightly from the last spreadsheet. Exponential has provided me an updated cost estimate, and the numbers went up, I don't have the old spreadsheet, but the numbers went up about $40,000. They're still less than what we had anticipated as of April 29, 13. When we look at the next spreadsheet that we'll talk about, we'll go through the owner furnished materials. We actually expect those numbers to come down, but at this point, because we have not received the bids for the construction of the substation, I was not comfortable reducing those estimates to reflect the OSN at this point. So they actually just went up slightly. Those are the changes primarily on this spreadsheet. Are there any questions on this spreadsheet?
One question, Michelle, this is Eric, is I'm assuming that these numbers do not reflect the PG&E discussion of $1.2 billion?
Correct.
Correct. The numbers that are reflected on here for PG&E are the numbers that are included in the current IA. The numbers have been, the ITCC tax down at the bottom has been adjusted based on the actual, on the overhead construction. The portion that gets deeded back to PG&E has to pay the ITCC, so that's reflected down there, but no additional expenses have been included.
And is there any update at all on discussions with PG&E about the 34% versus 22%?
Yeah, I'll be meeting with at 2 board meetings ago, the board approved the retention of an additional consultant, a tax attorney, and they've been reviewing these items, and they've been having contact with the administrative folks at PG&E, and we'll have an update meeting next week, and I'll write the board a memo with regards to that update next week.
That's very important.
This is Bob. The other thing I'd just like to add in that's obviously not reflected on this chart is any increase in PG&E costs effectively could impact our maintenance fees, our monthly maintenance, or our monthly maintenance fees to them, and cause a rate increase from that.
Any other questions from the board or from the audience? Michelle, why don't you keep going, please?
Okay, the next spreadsheet is construction cost estimate versus actual. Bob, I apologize, I don't know the actual file name. I'm looking at the hard
I
copy.
have it right here. It's okay.
Okay. What I've done is I've taken, for all the different project components, I've taken our estimates, and then in the second column is the actual cost. I'll explain for the underground. We had an original estimate. It was done prior to April 29th. It's not reflected in the Out Valley overall forecast, so I didn't even include that estimate because it really skews the numbers. It doesn't give, I think, a real accurate picture of actuals versus estimates. So what you see in the underground column is just the actual. For the overhead, that's pretty self-explanatory. We had the overall estimate, and then for the overhead, we actually had two items. We have the overhead construction, and then we have the OFM, the owner furnished materials for the pole. And so you can see those numbers. For KM Green and KM Blue, we have everything, all of the OFM has been bid out. And then the only thing that remains to be bid, as I indicated, was the actual construction of both substations. And so what you can see is for all the various OFM items, and then the KM Green grading and drainage, that's the first line under KM Green substation, you can see the actual versus estimate. So going into the bid for the KM Green construction, you can see right now that we're actually, of $284,000 ahead of what we had anticipated being, and for KM Blue, we're $88,000 ahead of where we had estimated. So the comment that I made earlier about we think those estimates versus actual will end up being less than we anticipated, that's the reason I'm saying that, is right now when we look at OSM, we're coming out ahead on several items. So one of the items on here, the KM Blue switchgear, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. About $206,000, that's for the apparent low bidder at this point, but that is subject, that will be subject to approval. So, any questions on the spreadsheet?
One is why we had 0 as the estimate for OFM poles and overhead. Were we not expecting to spend money on
It was included in the overhead total estimate.
Okay.
Right.
Any other questions or comments from the board, from the audience?
I'm sorry, I wasn't fast enough, Standish. So on the poles, since they now know the soils condition for each pole that's being drilled, do we have any update on what cost changes might occur?
We don't yet. We are still in discussions with Wilson regarding that. The project team met in mid-January, and I'm right in the process of drafting a request for information back to Wilson. The design team, when we're looking at this, we've actually provided Wilson with more information about what they can anticipate. They had some assumptions in their bid about the types of soils that they were going to encounter and the amount of rock. So we're actually making their holes easier, and so we want to make sure that the proposal that we get back from Wilson reflects that change in construction that's going to make it easier for them. Their initial proposal did not take into account the change in construction, the quickness that they're going to be able to do these holes, and it was a potential cost increase, and that's just not acceptable to us. So we're still waiting to finish that negotiation.
So there's some risk that it could be a cost increase or a cost saving?
It could go either way at this point. We are really pushing to keep it a net zero to the district or cost benefit.
Thanks.
Do you want to go on to your third spreadsheet?
Sure. The third spreadsheet has information that the board saw about a year ago. We had received proposals from two different firms, Exponential being one of them, and another firm, NEI, and we were comparing those proposals to the proposals that we had received from Power Engineers. So what I've done is I've taken the information that was presented in those proposals, and I've included EEC's original proposal, their revised proposal, which has their original numbers, plus the change order that's before you today, and then compared this across the board to NEI and Power. The challenge is that when we had the original proposals, the pre-construction and the completion of the design for the overhead and the underground was not included, not requested from NEI. So it's not comparable. We don't have all the same items. So you'll see down at the bottom I have a total items 1, 2, and 4 for EEC and NEI. There's $555,780 versus the $540,700. And then the total, which is more a comparison of EEC's revised proposal and the power proposal. So it's a little bit convoluted because it's not, everything's not directly comparable. And this was based on the information that we had at the time we requested the proposal. And as Dave will talk about again during his presentation, the project changed a bit as we moved forward, and we realized that the information that we thought we had or the design was not as far along as we anticipated. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions that we have regarding this spreadsheet.
Michelle, this is Eric. The question I have is, what I recall is that when EDC came in, that RCI took on some additional responsibilities that had been included in the power
I
proposal.
apologize. I could barely hear you.
We have a satellite mic right close to me.
That's the end of that.
Michelle, how's that?
That's a little better.
Just a little better?
Yeah.
Okay. You keep moving away from me here. Very good. Okay, we're set. Michelle, what I recall is that when we changed from power engineers to EEC, we took some things out of what would have been in the engineer's scope and put them into RCI's scope. So RCI's cost, I think, went up. I think some of this was in inspection, for example, may have been in some other things, I can't read, some project management elements, I think. So I think that the 2.367 million from power included some work that EEC is not doing, and that instead RCI is doing. Is that right? Do I remember that correctly?
Correct.
And can you just give me a ballpark number about how much RCI's fee went up as a result of taking on that additional responsibility?
Going back, I don't remember exactly what our original proposal was. What I can tell you is that our approved contract, which includes, well, let me see, I can look at it right here. Our construction management, or our construction inspection costs are $580,920. So those were items that were originally a part of Power's proposal that were brought over to RCI. And that's based on, that number shows up on the overall cost spreadsheet.
Yes, I see that. So in a way, the proper comparison or the complete comparison would be if we take the EEC revised proposal of 831 and add 500,000, get to 1.35 million for that bundle of work, and compare that to the power of 2.36 million, right? That'd be a more direct comparison?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. That's really what I wanted to know. Thanks.
Okay, perfect.
Any questions, any additional questions from the board on the cost stuff? From the audience? So no actions necessary here, Michael, is that correct?
Yeah, one question and one clarification. Since we're on the consultant proposal comparison, Michelle, could you let us know how RCI's expenses compared to budget to date are and how you anticipate there will be in 2014?
Sure. Currently, right now, we are slightly over, we're about 30,000 over where we anticipated being at this point in time. The reason for that is actual, we had anticipated construction ending as of October 31st of 2013, and we actually had construction inspection and observation duties in all the way through November and actually into December. In going through where we've spent, how much we've spent, and where we anticipated being at this point, I'm very comfortable with our budget as it stands to date. Like I said, the amount that we have gone over was for construction inspection, and had we done it in the spring versus the fall, it was money that we had anticipated spending, so we just spent it sooner as opposed to later. So we're at about, I don't know the exact percentage we've spent, probably about 55% of our budget to date. And what you have to understand is the first year of construction is more heavily loaded to things like construction survey. A lot more of the environmental work had to be done up front. So in looking at the items, I'm very comfortable that we're going to be able to complete the project in budget.
Great. Let's move on to item 8C, which is continued discussion and possible action regarding request for change order for engineering services from Exponential Engineering. In
If I
relation,
may, Standish, there's a part 2 to item B,
excuse me.
so if appropriate.
I'm sorry. You're going to talk about cash sources and uses.
Yes, sir. And I'm also going to update on the Russ loan supplemental. This week, district staff was able to file with Russ the annual Form 7 for calendar 2013. This was a much more extensive filing than the previous monthly filings, and it required information about our operations, our generators, etc. The Form 7 income statement is shown in your packet and reflects a 1.17 to your ratio. We did not need to allocate property taxes to electric in December and had anticipated pulling back some of the November property taxes. However, a question on the how the greenhouse gas auction proceeds were to be treated kept us from pulling it back to the exact 1.05. Once we have answered any questions the finance department of Russ has with the supplemental loan, it will go to the first of 2 committees for review and hopeful approval. Still anticipating final approval this winter and fund availability this summer when needed. Howard couldn't be here, he's traveling today, but he once again assures us that the timeline looks good and the funds are available at Russ for allocations.
So Michael, did we get to 1.17 because of the auction proceeds?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what that was.
This is a terminology question. Patronage capital, that's property taxes. I'm looking at the first line on the schedule here where it talks about material ratio, operating revenue, and patronage capital was the phrasing. I just haven't seen that terminology before, so I wondered, does that mean property taxes in another language, or?
Does that include property taxes in the first line?
Property taxes are shown under the non-operating margins other.
What does patronage, I think that's what they.
What's patronage capital? This is not a familiar term, so.
That's their terminology, but it doesn't really apply to us.
Not extorting money out of anybody.
Nope.
Any questions from the board on Russ application? Audience?
With that, I'll move on to the expense breakdown. And you have copies for the board. So on the Out Valley cost that Michelle went over, the total Out Valley project cost stands today at $37 million. We've expensed $11 million of that fund with $25 million left to expense. Left in the RUS funds in the bank, these are money that we've already drawn from Russ, is $7,339,000. We have the availability to draw an additional $11 million. Our Russ loan, supplemental loan, is in the amount of $8 million. So we have a potential for remaining funds of $26 million. Russ funds in excess of expenses $623,000 with a current reserve balance of $3.2 million.
So that really is on track with what we thought when we started the supplemental loan process.
Yes, sir. Our
Between the
overage
5 and the 8.
Right. Our overage has been really primarily the overhead, which we knew when we went to that Russ loan supplemental.
Right.
So with the assumption that we're going to get the $8 million supplemental loan, we have relatively little cushion left relative to forecast expense levels. And the current reserve balance, why is that on there and what is it telling me?
This is an amount that the board can decide to, put forward towards the rest loan and not borrow as much or borrow as much. The idea and what the board direction has been is to apply for the full $8 million and then and draw on it as per board direction.
So theoretically, we have $3.8 million of reserve. So that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's electricity capital reserve, that's not operating reserve.
That is correct. That's undesignated reserve. That's not funds that we've even designated for this year capital projects. It does not include COP funds. It does not include operating cash.
I guess Danish asked if that was for electricity related cost expenses. My understanding is that was money we got paid back for money that we had used earlier, but we can use that in any way we want. Is that?
That's absolutely correct. It's not only money that we had paid earlier, as you mentioned, it's also from the rate stabilization fund, which we had garnered.
So that's $3.2 million that we currently have in this reserve balance. Is money that we can choose to use however we want. And it may be to avoid borrowing more from us. It may be to hold specifically to avoid spikes in rates for one reason or another, or it may be simply to have as a general reserve.
Correct.
So it's not related, it's not restricted to just electricity, but it's not in our operating reserves.
Correct.
Great. So Michael, anything else on 8B?
No, thank you.
How about 8C, which is exponential engineering proposed change order?
Included in your packet is a request for change order for engineering service from Exponential Engineering. This change order requests $134,810 for additional costs incurred in 2013 and $97,900 for anticipated additional costs in 2014. As you may recall, Exponential Engineering replaced Power Engineers in January of 2013 as our electrical engineer on record. The reason the board chose Exponential was for a reduced cost, as Power estimated that their total fee would run, as Michelle indicated in her spreadsheet, somewhere around $2.3 million, more than $1 million than the combined total of what Exponential is charging, along with the $500,000 that RCI took on. Exponential bid for design services was $440,000, was based on a 90% design. However, many aspects of the design had to be redone as they were not acceptable to PG&E or practical in the course of construction, including a change from a 6-inch to an 8-inch conduit that was subsequently changed to 3 4-inch conduits that took engineering to redesign the trench, 3 reactive power issues, redesign of bridge crosses, continuous review and design adjustment by PG&E, including structure and conductor loading, ground clearance, pole arm configurations, etc. Obviously, Exponential has had many challenges and their scope of work has increased dramatically. As we had discussed at the last meeting, the district's major disappointment is that this overage was not brought to us quickly, that it was brought to us just recently. To combat this, Exponential will be holding budget review sessions with the project team on a regular basis every 2 weeks to ensure that we are informed of any overages in advance so that I can take that to the finance and to the board quickly. It should also be noted that RCI, a local firm, will be taking on more of the inspection services needed for the project to help contain costs. As noted, with that, Dave Wrightley is here today to discuss the change order and ask any questions.
Well, I appreciate you delaying action on this from the last meeting when I wasn't here, so my name can be attached to this
Well,
overage
We
expenditure.
just want to do whatever you do, Stanley.
But I mean, I watched the video of the last meeting. I think this was debated fully. Is there anything else that any board members want to add on further reflection?
Well, I, of course, had my say about how unhappy I was that the overages came as a surprise, and I guess, as I was thinking it over, I thought, if they've advised us that there's an increase in the scope of their work and they're asking for an additional payment going forward, i.e. the $97,000, I don't have any heartburn over that. The 134, I feel like we got the news so late that it was not responsible project management, and I would suggest some remedies such as paying the 134 at the end of the project, assuming that there are no more overages and that the project is completed on time. And you could look at that as perhaps punitive would be too strong a word, but certainly I think that the exponential folks would have to agree that they did not responsibly inform us in a timely manner, and that's not good project management. So, I see it.
Any comments from the audience? Dave, any reaction to that, or any comments that you would like to make?
I think Michael summarized what we've got in our change order request clearly, and we do certainly regret our inability to give you the heads up on what was happening as we were going through the very busy fall of 2013 and dealing with PG&E on these design changes. We are striving and working hard to maintain our budgets, and I can say that with the 97.9 that we're asking for 2014, that we are on budget, and that there's only one small scope change that I've informed Michael about. We are collecting information from PG&E before I may even come to him and tell him that is a small change order. It may not be anything, but until I learn a few more technical details from PG&E, we don't know if it's going to be any additional cost. But we are on budget right now, and we are certainly going to keep the district apprised of anything that happens this year that we think is outside of the scope of what's covered under this letter.
I guess one question I have, two questions. The first is the $134,810 calculated based on your full rate that we're paying? Is it based on a full hourly rate that includes your full complement of overhead profit?
Yes, it's based on our 2013 billing rates.
Okay, and what I'm wondering is, would you and your firm consider some discount to that rate for those hours that have come out to be 134?
In our discussions with Michael in coming up with this change order request, this formal request, we have already taken a hit, a substantial hit over what we have spent in 2013. I believe, I don't have the exact number in front of me, we were about $100,000. So this 134 is actually only part of what we have already gone over.
Yeah, let me confirm that. This originally came in $120,000 over what you're seeing today, and district staff discussed what you're discussing with Exponential and have already reduced that by, it was $120,000. And I think Tom Jadosi actually made that statement at the last meeting. I don't know if it was.
I remember him making a general statement. I didn't know.
Yeah, so the original letter that is before you, it was different when it first
Okay,
came.
and my second question, and I know this is very minor, but it's sort of more of a matter of principle. I'm assuming that every 2-week meeting that will go over scope, that we will not get billed for that. I mean, it seems to me that's being initiated because we now are worried that proper project management procedures weren't followed. And so by initiating that, I don't want to I hope we're not being charged for, whatever that is, an hour or two twice a month for however many months. I know it's a small amount, but it's more the principle on that.
Yeah, I can assure you, you're not going to get billed for that time.
Carolyn?
I have to agree that since I've been a project manager and I've done a lot of design under bid, that when something's changing, you need to say something right away. I mean, I'm working on this rec center project, and every other phrase out of the guy's mouth is change order, scope change. And it's not normal to wait till the end of the year and say, oh, gee, we just did our books and look what happened, kind of thing. I agree that it's not proper procedure.
Well, I'm confident that the money was earned. And if we weren't scraping at the top of the range that we ever even expected this project to cost, I probably wouldn't think too much more about this. But, the $5 million plus overage on the overhead has just given, I think it's given us all a slightly bad feeling about the project. And, but nevertheless, I do think, I appreciate Bob's thought about, yes, pay it, but pay it towards the end. On the other hand, being, architect in that profession and how these things work, how these professional organizations work, I guess I'm not happy about it, but I would support this change order.
Bob Epstein, Peter, any comments?
I kind of agree with Eric on that. Rather than postponing the final payment, it gives you a little indigestion. I think in terms of motivating our relationship to get this project done, I would say pay it now.
This is Bob. Most of my comments were last week, but I agree with this. I feel that I regret this happened, but I feel they've done an excellent job with us, and we should maintain a relationship and just pay.
Okay, well, do we have a motion to that effect?
Well, that's why we waited for you to stand here.
And I can support this in light particularly of the $120,000 that's already been offered to ameliorate the error. So.
Yeah, Dave, we do appreciate that concession. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I'd like to move. This is Eric. I'd like to move approval of the change order as requested and as negotiated by the staff.
I'll second it. So, votes? O'Grady seconds it.
Yeah. Rickard, aye.
Andy, aye.
O'Grady, aye.
Durbrick, aye.
Epstein, aye.
So it passes. Moving on to 8D, which is discussion of possible approval of procurement agreement for the KMPUD substation project, the 35 kV reactor in relation to the district's Out Valley project. Michael, once again, we'll start with you.
Great. Excuse me 1 second. Just got hooked up. So we have a letter of recommendation for the KM Blue substation for the 35 kV reactor, which we know will pass out, and Dave Rutley is here today to address his and Michelle's recommendation. Dave?
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. The reactor that we have specified in got bids for the KMPUD substation. That is basically a large inductor, but it's going to be installed in what will look pretty much like a pad mount transformer, a green transformer. It's required due to our understanding and our analysis of the underground cable system. This very, very long underground cable system will have a lot of capacitance. This reactor is needed to offset that and to maintain reliable voltages on our cable system and at the powerhouse. Unfortunately, we only received one bid. Exponential has worked with and is familiar with two companies in North America that do make reactors of what we would call a medium voltage size. The second company does not normally make a 35 kV reactor. We did send them a bid package. They said they could make one. Informed us that they didn't have the ability to test it, therefore we only received one bid. We are familiar with Gilbert Electrical, the company that did provide a bid. We have discussed their manufacturing and design in substantial detail with them, looked at other products that they have provided other utilities and are very comfortable with what they build. So we are certainly going to be recommending them. One, they gave us an optional price for an environmental oil. This is an oil-filled device, very similar to a transformer. This additional cost of about $3,000 would allow us to install this reactor inside the powerhouse, avoiding dealing with issues like the snow and taking less of the parking lot. And it significantly shortens conduit and cable to be installed between the switchgear and the reactor. I feel like the savings will be more than $3,000, though that'll remain to be seen when we open the substation bids. But with that said, we are recommending that the board award the purchase of the reactor to Gilbert Electrical with the FR3 oil for $73,620. Our estimate was $45,000. It was a difficult device to estimate. There's not a lot of 35 kV reactors out there. Any questions?
What does a 35 kV reactor do?
Well, what it is. It's an inductor. It's a big coil, and there are two types of reactive power. There's inductance and capacitance. The cable essentially is a big capacitor. So what this inductor does is offset that capacitance. But in a practical perspective, if we did not have the reactor, when we turned the power on the 35 kV on the Out Valley project, the voltage at the powerhouse on the 35 kV would be abnormally high. In fact, high enough that it could be damaging the cable insulation. What this reactor will do is to lower that voltage and keep us into a nominal operating level. Does that answer the question?
Yes, and what is FR3 oil? Is that a chemical formula, or?
It is a non-petroleum mineral oil. It's basically vegetable oil. That's how we kind of jokingly describe it. But it's a product that's been synthesized that is used in environmentally sensitive areas and also where fires are concerned. A mineral oil, like the oil that's going to be in the transformer, has to be, you have to build containment for those oil systems. You don't need it for this stuff. It really essentially is like spilling vegetable oil. But it has to have the property of heat transfer, which is the oil's in there to basically cool the unit. The same thing with the transformer.
And does that have to be replenished periodically, or is it such a contained system that it stays full all the time?
It's a contained system. The only replenishment would be if there was a leak, which we do not expect.
Neither do we.
And just a clarification, Dave, on the construction bid, is there an alternative in there in the bid package that says, if this reactor is in the building, then the cable lengths are shorter, and what's an alternative bid?
We are intending to issue an addendum for the construction contract. We were not able to tell the contractors about these three O&M items pending the board's action today. So in that addendum, we intend to submit a revised drawing for the cable and conduit installation and actually just get a price from them for what we now are going to build, but putting the reactor inside.
I see. Good, thanks.
Dave, this is one other question for you. The reactor is tunable, and is that manual or computer?
We expect very little tuning. Reactors are sometimes tuned when they're used as part of a filter system or power quality, and this reactor is not being used for that. It's only being used to clamp the voltage down.
Okay, so it's not helping, but it won't help with in-valley reactive power then, necessarily?
No, it won't. It is only there to offset what the Out Valley project is doing, the capacity.
Okay, thanks.
Any comments, questions from the audience? Any further comments from the board?
I think it's worth it to spend the extra 3,000.
We have the space.
Yeah. Well, the space is disappearing. But I would be prepared to, this is Peter, to move to approve Exponential's recommendation and purchase the reactor from Gilbert Electrical Option with the $73,620.
And staff has some comments, recommendations?
Yeah, Dave,
Sorry.
no problem. Dave, just to remind the board, this reactor was not envisioned in the previous electrical engineer's estimates. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, we had Exponential created models because we were concerned about the reactive power. We constructed and adjusted computer models so that we could see what the capacitance was going to be and help us make the decision that this was needed. And in fact, not only that it was needed, but what size it was going to be.
And it's needed because we don't want to melt the insulation off the cable.
That's correct. It is there to protect your expensive investment in that underground cable.
Staff has reviewed the recommendations from the electrical and engineers, and we have discussed it with operations staff. We feel we have the room in the powerhouse to house it inside and feel that's the best location for maintenance and snow removal purposes. Therefore, staff recommends, if we were a board member, we would second Peter's motion.
Okay, well, Rickard seconds Peter's motion.
So votes, Rickard?
Aye.
Kennedy, aye.
O'Grady, aye.
Dornbrook, aye?
Epstein, aye.
Great, so let's move on to 8E, which is discussion and possible approval of procurement agreement for the KMPUD substation project, 38 kilovolt switchgear in relation to the Out Valley project.
RENA is passing out an evaluation and recommendation for the purchase of the 38 kV switchgear. As the board remember, Dave Rightly did a diagram and showed this switchgear in that dirt room as well. And Dave is here to put forth his recommendation.
The switchgear is set at a 38 kV level because we've asked for slightly more insulation to the switchgear because of the elevation. You would not do the same kind of thing for the reactor. If there's any question why the reactor is 35 and the switchgear is 38, is it gives us a margin of error inside of the switchgear that we do not need in the reactor. The switchgear is the electrical connection or interface between the Out Valley underground line and the KMPUD transformer. So the power will come from the Out Valley into the switchgear and go through a breaker out to the transformer, through a second breaker out to the reactor, and the switchgear includes all the incorporated protective relays. These are essentially a series of metal cabinets and breakers in there, similar to the switchgear you've seen in the powerhouse, but larger cabinets because of the higher voltage. We received a total of 5 proposals. The lowest bid proposal, ESS Metron, did not include any of the contractual documents signed. It was just a simple proposal. They have not responded at all to our request for more information from them. We've looked at all of the other proposals. At this point, the lowest bid proposal, which is Myers Power Products, the most responsive proposal anyway, we still have one outstanding issue with them. We're discussing delivery and LDs with them. They've been very responsive. Were not able to give us an answer yesterday due to a corporate officer that was out of the office. We expect to get an answer from them early next week. There's comments in there about the other proposals that were higher cost. I'm not going to go into the details of those, but we will recommend that the board award the contract to Myers Power Products for the $206,375 as long as they conform and meet the one remaining contractual requirement. We are going to hear from them next week on. The engineer's estimate for the switchgear was $220,000. And are there any questions?
From the board?
You, Dave, from what you've heard from Myers, do you think there's any risk that they cannot meet that need?
The sales engineer informed me that he does not see a problem with this, and that he just needed to get a corporate approval. He says it's a very straightforward switchgear, and we're not asking for, we're pretty close to when they could actually deliver it. So we didn't expect a problem, but we still needed them to confirm that.
And do you see any risk that they'll say they can, but then in fact they really can't?
There's a possibility that they could come back and say they won't meet this last issue, liquidated damages, in which case I think we would need to look at the next most responsive proposal.
Which was the 254 switchgear power systems?
PowerCon is the next lowest cost, but there are some issues that PowerCon had. They wanted to assert some contractual requirements. If we were going to talk to them, we would have to basically go through the same kind of discussion to see if they can meet the contractual requirements. We have not done that with PowerCon at this point because they were a higher bid.
Yeah. Okay.
Any questions, comments from the audience? Or
Are these all local, or is there, I'm just curious, or?
the question, Dave, is where are these vendors located?
These switchgears are manufactured all over the country. Myers, for example, is in Ohio. Metron is in Denver. PowerCon, I don't remember exactly where their location is. They are represented sometimes by California equipment representatives. And in fact, the Myers, the sales engineer that we're working with at Myers needs corporate approval from a California corporate office for Myers Power Products.
So, Michael, do you have any comments?
Yeah, staff recommends approval of the contract with Myers Power Products, provided that they agree to the LD, as Dave had mentioned. And if they don't, I would stipulate in the motion that the president of the board and the general manager would then negotiate with the second highest responsive bidder.
Rickard, so move.
Andy seconds.
So voting, starting with
Rickard, aye.
Andy, aye.
O'Grady, aye.
Darbrick, aye?
Epstein, aye.
So now we move on to 8F, discussion and possible approval of procurement agreement for the KM Green substation project, substation steel, in relation to the Out Valley project.
We have received a recommendation letter from Exponential Engineering and RCI, which is being passed out by Rena Sullivan. This is for the steel at the KM Green substation, which basically is the transmitting. It holds up the cable as it goes through the various apparatus, and Dave Reitley is here with Exponential to give us an explanation.
Thanks, K. Michael. Yeah, this steel will be dead-end towers that hold the wire coming in from the overhead power lines. It'll be the stands that hold up the coax switches we purchased, the supports, the CCVTs, all the other equipment that we've already purchased. It includes the stairways and grounding platforms, because as you recall, our equipment is lifted higher above the ground because of expected snow levels, so these stairways are going to be needed. So it's fairly straightforward substation steel. We received 3 bids. This one is more straightforward than the other ones. We got 3 competitive bids. We adjusted the bid of Pacific Steel Structures. They are the high bid anyway, but they had included a powder coating. They were trying to attempt to get us a darker colored steel. We asked them to remove that option and brought their price down to $194,000. That way, all three bidders were bidding the same galvanized steel. Distran was the lowest, most responsive, including signing all of the contract documents. Therefore, we recommend the board award the purchase of the KM Green substation steel to Distran Steel LLC for a price of $165,645, and the engineer's estimate for the steel was $176,000. Any questions?
Does the Forest Service have any problems with galvanized steel? It's pretty shiny.
This Distran is they've offered a dulled galvanized. This is a dulled galvanized, but yeah, I know Michelle will comment.
Yeah, we actually went and verified with what we had stated in the environmental documents, and it was a black, a brown, or a gray that was allowed, and so we felt that the dulled galvanized met the intent of the EIS.
So it'll be like a gray, a dull gray, flat gray?
A flat gray, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other comments, questions from the board, from the audience? Michael, do you have any comments, recommendations?
Staff concurs with the recommendation.
I'll make the motion to approve the award of the steel contract for KM Green to Distran Steel in the amount of $165,645.
Rickard seconds.
So, voting, Rickard?
aye. And aye.
O'Grady, aye.
Dorbrick, aye.
Epstein, aye.
So, I think that's it for the overhead. Moving to 8G, which is the continued discussion and possible action regarding the district's efforts to secure necessary power procurement, scheduling and settlement services, and regulatory affairs coordination in anticipation of connecting to the national power grid. I know this has been considered by the planning committee extensively, so start with Michael.
I'll start off with thanking David and Michelle, and if you guys want to check out, thanks again for attending.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all. Goodbye.
Bye.
Steve Brightly.
Has left the conference.
I'll take this in two parts. First, both of these items have been addressed with the planning committee. First, we'll talk about the selection of a schedule coordinator, power purchase provider, and then talk about some of the agreements that have been put forth. As the committee is aware, the district did go out for a power purchase and schedule coordinating services. 2 bids were received, a complete bid from Shell Energy and a partial bid from TEA. During this review, we will focus on Shell, as TEA's proposal is hard to consider as they are unable to provide power purchase services or provide any services until their contract with University of California is finalized. That said, TEA's proposal does provide comparative value with the Shell proposal. The Shell proposal breaks out the cost for scheduling coordination services as well as the indicative price for each of the 3 marketing strategies. And those marketing strategies have been discussed as buying only in the day-ahead market, all power at market, a partial peak hedge, and then a peak plus off-season, off-peak hedge. And this is described as follows. So in your, I think I sent this out separately, it's a multicolored spreadsheet. You can see the differences between Shell and TEA. As far as schedule coordination services, Shell came in at $68,000. TEA came in with at $94,000. Plus, they had a startup fee, which Shell did not. I think they were similar in all other aspects of their bid. But what this does is it provides for all of the the services that we would need for schedule coordinating, because power coordination or power purchase and the subject comes into, 4 general topics here. It's the schedule coordination, the actual power purchase, the regulatory affairs, and the market strategy for that. And Shell actually fills several, or at least 2 of these functions. They also estimated the full market hedge, the partial hedge, and the off-peak and off-peak hedges, which is defined in the spreadsheet as well, with all the costs, the range of notional district wholesale costs at somewhere between 7.44 and 7.64 cents per kilowatt hour. So before I go on, I was wondering if there's any questions on this first spreadsheet.
I have a question, which is probably naive, especially in the context of the planning committee's consideration of this, but what does power purchasing and scheduling mean? Meaning, don't you get the electricity delivered as you need it, or is there some sort of storage component?
Very good question. So how this works is that the district would provide our schedule coordinator a 7-day rolling need. We would forecast that we're going to need 200 kilowatts or however much we need 7 days in advance. This is 365 days a year. The schedule coordinator would then work with CalISO and actually procure that power based on our procurement contract with Shell. So they'd buy it all off the day-ahead market. They'd already have purchased 80% of our peak loads, but none of our off-season, or as the last one is that they would purchase all of the 80% and 50%, and then the rest of it floats on the day-ahead market. So that we, as if Brandy's estimate is wrong, it would either it would go into the day-ahead market, so we'd either be short or long on that day-ahead market. The schedule coordinator is actually the one that works with CalISO to make sure that function, that we get the power that we're looking for and need, and then they true up. Because we always get the power, it's just how much are we going to pay for it, and the day-ahead market is this fluctuating rate. The rest of them are guaranteed in different intervals. This looks at a 3-year contract, so that we'd be buying ahead for a 3-year period. 3 years works for us. It's also the standard, industry. Longer or 3 years kind of minimum. Kind of works for us is that's kind of when the WAPA, Western Area Power Authority, is a government agency that actually sells power to government agencies, and their next allocation of new services begins in 3 years. So we would have that ability to get involved with that. That's something that we've talked about with planning, and we were given that lead through not only Howard Barnes, but also one of our contacts. We've been contacting other like utility districts and trying to learn off of them. And Plymouth Sierra, Bob Marshall, has been a wealth of information on how we should strategize our power purchases. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, very much so. Okay. Any comments from the planning?
Well, I brought this up at the planning committee, and Michael answered it well, but I'll just bring it up again, along with some specific questions as a result of trying to wade through some of the documents that are in the packet. I'm just afraid that we don't know what we don't know, because we're all new to this aspect of things. I think that Michael's put together a good team of people with Don Dame and Braun Legal, and probably Cena, probably Shell, and so on. But I still worry that my general worry is that we don't know what we don't know, and we'll only learn about it by going through it over the first year or so. And I just don't know what mistakes we may make along the way. The advantage of an NCPA or a TEA, and I'm not proposing that we go back and look at those at all, is that they essentially act as the integrator across everything. now we, basically Michael and Brandy are acting as the integrators across everything. And we're going to be learning as we go. And Michael has, I know Michael and Brandy have both learned a lot already and getting well prepared. So anyway, I'm just going to just throw that out as a general concern. When I was trying to read through the documents, again, as I said in the planning committee meeting, I mean,
200 plus pages.
10% of it maybe I understood. I just don't understand. It's different language, it's different legal language, it's different technical language. So for example, and so I'll ask a specific question. I think it was in a Shell document, one of the Shell documents, one of their agreements. There's a table where I think it's, you fill in with cost per megawatt hour. And then there's another table that's cost per megawatt month, I think. I've never heard the term. I brought this up to the planning committee while I was in some minutes. I have no idea. Are we buying megawatt hours or are we buying megawatts? That's a pretty basic question. I don't even know. What are we buying? I know we need, it's like buying megawatts would be like building our powerhouse and having 5 megawatts. Are we buying a virtual powerhouse? Is that what we're paying? Or are we only paying for the electricity that comes through a meter and measured in megawatt hours or kilowatt hours?
It would be the latter.
So what's that table in there for about megawatts?
We asked Shell to come up with, and ISO, to come up with their template agreements, which are before the board today, just for review. Braun Legal are also looking at these, and also Don Dane and our team are looking at those. I don't have a specific answer to your question, but I assure you that the final confirmation agreement that will be associated with this won't come until June. So we'll have a whole bunch of time to go through these agreements, have Braun Legal up to answer specific questions about the agreements and get a good familiarity until we pledge any of the district's dollars towards.
Well, could I just ask for 2 things, between now and June? One is, as these agreements are formulated and better understood, and as you explain them to us, I would like a clear articulation of what, if any, risks are embedded in those agreements that we have to manage. Now, clearly, one risk would be that we can't forecast very well, I suppose. But I don't know what other risks there may be in those that are embedded in those agreements. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, you may remember that, probably well over 2 years ago, after meeting with NCPA, you and I put together a table of all the things that have to happen on a normal basis in the acquisition and distribution of electricity. And so there's a whole list of items, and then we had columns that was KMPUD, NCPA, knows who would deliver those things. I would love a refreshed table like that. So where there's a responsibilities column or deliverables column, and then KMPUD staff, our maintenance contractor, whoever that may be, PG&E, Shell Energy, Cal ISO, Don Dame, Braun Legal.
Sounds like
So
a wide table.
here's all these, but this is, we're the
Landscape format.
we're the integrator now. We're integrating across all these entities, and I would like to have a picture of all the things that need to happen over the course of a typical year around, well, I don't even know how to articulate them. I don't even know what they are, other than, I don't even know what they are.
The staff has done a
But-
very good job of doing, for example, the comparison between TEA and Shell
No.
Energy by doing admittedly not as wide a matrix as you're describing, but they did a really nice job of comparing the 2 bidders on each one of the key items that needed to be performed. So I think that is certainly a doable thing for the staff and a reasonable one, so that we can say, okay, now we've not going to jump to the conclusion that we made our decision that it's Shell Energy, how does that integrate into the overall picture, category by category, group by group? That's a good suggestion.
To me, it's a suggestion so that I, and I think the rest other board members, can have a better picture of things without having to understand every sentence in these agreements, but also help all of us just understand where our duties are and where risks are in our either knowledge or resources or whatever.
Got it.
So this is Bob Knopf for a couple of comments
Sure.
on that. So first off, I did some conversations with an acquaintance of mine who used to run SMUD and asked her for background checks on the people we're dealing with at Shell. And she made me extremely comfortable because they deal almost exclusively with munis. I mean, that's their biggest market, and they come from that area. So I'm just exceptionally comfortable with the people we're working with. And secondly, the big difference between wholesale and resale power is wholesale, you know, the grid runs itself, and the accounting system makes sure that everybody knew in advance how much power they needed and paid that appropriate real-time price. And we have an exceptionally easy load to anticipate. I mean, you can always assume that all the lifts will be running, and you might pay slightly more for that, but it's a small load and something we have enough data that we can measure as compared to other systems with air conditioning and things like that are much harder to do. So I think that's the big difference between these documents is you are saying, in order to keep the grid reliable, you know how much power you need, when you need it, and you have contracted for that power, so the net sum in California of supply matches demand. So I feel pretty good about where we are.
I mean, I would be interested in seeing that table, speaking for people who are not in the business.
Exactly, I agree. Anything that you can do to enlighten us would be appreciated. It's kind of intimidating for me.
Me
But,
too.
but as I understand it, we talked about TEA, and the other option, NCPA, is not available, right?
Right. At this point, NCPA is establishing how they will get new members into their 16-member portfolio, and they're not taking any applications at this time.
And we'll have a chance to revisit this, you said, at what point in the future?
Yes, we will. That's one of the reasons that we stuck with the 3-year.
So this is a starter position. I think these are our training wheels. We're picking a partner that has a lot of capability in this specific geographic area in this market, and I'm pretty darn comfortable that staff, is going to figure out what has to be done here. It is new territory, and admittedly so, but it's stuff that they're chewing through and understanding in an organized manner, and I have complete confidence they'll be able to do what needs to be done.
Good. Comments, questions from the audience? Cheryl?
I serve on the planning committee, and I will admit that when we began talking about this a couple of years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And I would just like to compliment Michael and Randy on what a great job you guys have done, just crystallizing this and making it as clear as possible. I mean, I really feel like that we're in really good hands.
So at this point, there's no action to be taken, and you're just looking. Do you have any additional comments, Michael?
Yeah, I do actually have action that I would like the board to take. We came before the planning committee, and they basically gave concurrence with 3 action items. And this is a general direction. This is not an agreement, but I just wanted the board concurrence with I'll let Bob talk about how planning, but the 3 items is a 3-year term. I think that's an important issue that we're going, and that's what we've been told is kind of the standard. Secondly, that staff is directed to continue work with Shell as the provider. And thirdly, though we'll look at all of the different market approaches, that the more conservative 50% off and 80% on peak is the one that we're kind of driving at. Though we do have the ability up until June to change that, I was just looking for concurrence of the direction that I think has been taken.
I recommend that we this set of approaches by Michael and staff, and keep monitoring it closely, of course, in the planning committee. That's the right place for us to be working this topic.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm willing to go along with the planning committee, so they've spent the time and the research on it, so they'll go along with your recommendation.
75 new acronyms.
Yeah, it makes my head spin when I see abbreviations.
RAR, LAR, RA.
Michael set a record, we got 5 acronyms in one sentence.
Yeah.
Post on the wall, all the acronyms.
Yeah, you know, if you could draw a picture of how this would work, that would make me happy, but it probably isn't possible, so I think I'd be happy.
I also support that direction. So is that what we need to do on G, 8G?
Yes.
So 8H, discussion of possible action on Governor's declaration of official drought state of emergency in the district's efforts to respond to potential drought conditions. Once again, we'll start with you, Michael.
This has been extensively reported in the news. Everybody knows the state that the California is, and as far as a drought situation, and it actually has impacts on the Kirkwood community. Kirkwood is not immune to water woes. We've started off with a community awareness program by putting it into our newsletter, by putting it on the website. We feel that it's important to react quickly and react strongly to this. We're in uncharted territory. I've been here for 17 years. 2013 was the driest year on record. So this is basically uncharted territory on this. And we're tracking our aquifer. Currently, we're about 90 feet above the pump at well number 4. And that's how we track this. Is well number 4 is the one over in East Meadows. It's right next to well number 5. Presumably, those aquifer levels are about the same. Back in 2006, 2007, I worked with the board on creating a water stage alert, which I put into the packet. And it has various levels of, once that well number 4 aquifer drops to a specific level, then certain actions can be taken. I placed that into the packet to look forward to board comments on the levels, the action items that could be taken for potential changes that could be considered at the next board meeting. One of the changes that could be discussed is, are those aquifer levels of 55, 50, and 45, are those too aggressive, or should they possibly be moved up to in order to call the first water stage alert, possibly from 55 to maybe 60 or 70 feet. Those are the type of changes that we would be looking at the next meeting, to either leave it alone and leave the numbers the same, change the reaction by the, if we do hit a 70 number, is the reaction just a 2-day-a-week watering schedule, and all the other things that are in the packet. So I wanted to bring this up at first and give the board an opportunity to look at our water stage alert, opportunity to take public comment, and then at the next meeting try to gather all these up and have a finalized version for possible action by the board.
Michael, do you have you probably do, do you know, or can you communicate to us what the normal level is above the pump? I mean, in a normal year, let's just say, how far above it would normally be, say in May, how much in July, how much in November? I mean, just so we have some sense of what normal is.
Yeah, right now at 90-some feet, we're absolutely normal.
Okay.
I did not see any drops in that aquifer level during the last year, during the 2013, that made me feel that we needed to instigate this any sooner. I'm just reacting to the dry year and the possibility that aquifer could drop.
But if 90 feet is normal, then the 45 feet, when basically stage 4 kicks in when we're basically half the supply that we normally have.
Right, and we just don't know how quickly that last 45, that's the uncharted territory. You know, does our aquifer, is it like this, or is it like this?
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the questions that we have, and I think it faces everyone in California, you know, how aggressively we approach this subject.
Well, I've got two thoughts here, Michael. One is, you know, if we're going to responsibly manage the water situation, which is inevitable and appropriate in the current circumstances and maybe in all circumstances, I think it would be helpful if we had, you know, a little bit in the chart and graph space, like, you know, here's the well normal level 90 feet, and here's the actual as measured over time, so we can all watch the wiggly lines and kind of decide, do we know what we're doing and are we taking appropriate actions? That would be very good for me to visualize what the situation is. That's item number one. Item number two, you know, aquifers, my understanding of this is you've got a giant underground capacitor and you're pouring electricity in one end and pulling it out the other end, and you don't know how much is in the middle. It would seem to me that taking actions predicated only on an observed level in the wells is underplaying our hand, because we're all a little bit smarter than that. You're talking about a trailing indicator where the aquifer got to, but we already have a bunch of leading indicators like rainfall isn't happening. So I would suggest that rather than having just a slavish, you know, stage 2 happens at 55 feet and stage 3 happens at this many feet, that we put in there the logic that says, or the board may elect to invoke stage 2 based on their knowledge of the situation, regardless of what the aquifer level is at that point in time. I think that would give us an active control, and in a case like this, we would probably want to exercise it. We'd probably, in my view, want to go to a higher stage alert than the aquifer currently indicates by simple measurement, because we know the input is being constrained and ultimately there will be an impact. We don't understand how big the impact will be, but sure as heck there will be one.
Understood, good point.
It might be valuable to review the Curry study. He's the one that established those 2 wells. My understanding is that it's affected by Cable's Lake. That there's a channel of water that goes from Cable's Lake over to Martin's Point, and that we've tapped into that. So I concur with what you're saying, but I don't know how you could quantify it, though.
In reading through the stages, the only thing that I would suggest maybe correct or changing would be there doesn't seem to be a big change from stage 1 to stage 2. Then there's a fairly big change from stage 2 to stage 3. Particularly, I mean, regarding irrigation, and I might suggest, I mean, maybe next time I can provide a suggestion, but something that makes stage 2 more of a little bit more restrictive on the way to stage 3.
Caroline, you had a question or comment?
How deep are the wells our wells?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How deep are our wells?
Right around, I think the well itself is 295 feet. The pump is at 295 feet. The well itself goes down to maybe 300, 350 feet. So they don't put it at the bottom of the well. Yeah, 6 of that. So that is for wells 3, 4, and 5. Well number 2 is very shallow. It was a grandfathered well. It's probably only 50 feet deep. And
Because what I've been understanding, you know, I have a farm and wells, and there are a lot of issues in Paso about this, that if you're down several hundred feet, at least in this current drought, you're probably okay. And it's the people who have wells that are, say, around 100 feet or less, that are, at least in our aquifer, are having, you know, a lot of issues. So I'm glad if we're deeper than that, you know. Makes a
though
difference.
well number 2, your point is well taken. The well number 2 in 2012 actually produced 50% of our water, and it's a shallow one. So in September or October, when we'll actually, you know, as Peter mentioned during the board meeting, that's when the problem will occur. In my history, that well is actually dried up. So that's how
Consider reboring that, is that something that's ever come to the table?
We've actually redeveloped it twice in the last 15 years,
So it's still shallow?
but it's still shallow.
Where is that one?
Well, number 2 is over by the rec center. It's a good point. We could talk to, well, we couldn't talk to Dr. Curry, but we could talk to a hydrologist about it. The thought being is that well number 2 is basically a shallow well because it takes off of, it's impacted by surface water. It's so going deeper may or may not provide. Back when Dr. Curry was here, we made Swiss cheese of the south end of the valley. We drilled everywhere for water. Could not find water anywhere. What's that?
In the range of 100 or 200 test holes.
Yeah. And some of those are around well number 2. Until this gentleman, that's Dr. Curry from Berkeley, I believe, came out and came up with the theory that Peter came up with, and then he came out there with the witching stick and said right there, and that was well 4. And then he says, why not there? And that's well 5. So that's how it came about.
He based it on the geology and the glacial bench above Dangberg. He found it. I mean, we've been looking for a couple of years to no avail. It's pretty amazing.
So you think that aquifer is fed by water leaking out of the bottom of Capel's Lake?
I believe that was the assertion.
I think we've all seen lakes like Capel's Lake go dead dry in drought conditions. That's a little disconcerting.
Well, and also when you look at, jumping ahead, you look at the directive, the sheet of directives, item number 7, the way I interpret that is that because of this emergency, EID will have the option of not following with the settlement that was achieved through the water rights, and they maybe start releasing water sooner rather than later. I don't know if I interpreted that right. But I don't know how that affects the aquifer.
Well, it was interesting, because I had heard this, and remember, I mean, what was it, 5 years ago, what the lake was drained to fix the dam? I suggested at that point to Tom, I'm not sure if it was done, but just to see if that had any impact on 4 and 5. I don't know if that was ever done, but that would have been a real test because the lake was drained down to a very low level.
Yeah, there was no impact to wells 4 and 5 on that. Whether, it was a timing issue.
Is it so temporary? Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Caroline?
To me, the use of water in this valley is impacted by all these guests and people who don't own here. I think owners are very, and people who live here are very conscious of the water. I certainly am. But I would suggest that there be somewhere in here, some kind of education of the guests through lodging, at least through the main lodging people, because putting it on your website or notifying owners isn't going to do anything for the thousands of people who come here and use a shower for an hour or wash the dishwasher with 3 things in it or whatever. That there's got to be something through lodging for guests,
Excellent
whether it's a
point.
handout or postings or something.
Yeah, I've seen them in other hotels. It's a great idea,
Got to
conserve
be
water.
something, because they're the ones that are using so much water in the season.
Same thing at the rec center. I mean, we need to limit
Absolutely.
the lengths of showers because we have owners that go there to take a shower so they don't have to pay
Right.
for water.
Right.
Really?
Oh, yeah, a lot of people do that.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I use the common bathroom.
Now I know what I'm
I tell
missing.
people use the common bathroom in
You're
the
60
lobby.
a month for a free shower.
That's a real incentive to sign up for the KCA.
I think so.
Finally, we found one.
Where do you see our new building?
Yeah,
Maybe we'll
really.
sign up.
We're gonna shut down the swimming pool in stage 3 though, so I don't know.
Let's put that one in stage 1.
It's covered, Bob.
No, we have a covered.
So Michael, you've got a lot of good input. What are you looking for here? Basically for us to read these documents and action at a future meeting?
Yes, sir. Provide input so that those could be incorporated into a red line version of the existing. I think we've heard quite a few good comments today. We'll incorporate those, and then anything else so that we could bring this back, discussion, and possibly approve a new water stage alert system at our March meeting.
Okay. And then on the, sorry, Cheryl.
There was one other comment that came up in the planning meeting about the watershed and how our water goes back into the watershed, and that I thought you wanted to make mention of it in this meeting.
Yeah, I think one of the points is that Kirkwood is kind of unique in that all of the water that we use goes back into our watershed because of our disposal method. It actually is just a timing issue that it all ends up in Kirkwood Creek one way or the other. So.
Now, the levels 55, 50, 45, those are feet above the well head or the pump?
The pump.
Yeah.
Yep.
And how low have we seen those?
I have seen them at 68 feet, and that's after 17 years. And I don't think there's any, I don't believe there's any information previous to that.
Yeah, as we've discussed, I think we might want to look at widening the number of feet that trigger stage 1, 2, and 3. Anything else on H?
No.
That's it. How about I? Initial review and possible action regarding the district's capacity study and potential impacts on developer connection fees.
As the committee is aware, staff has been looking at dividing our capital plan into two parts: capacity, or what we would need to build or expand our existing infrastructure to accommodate additional units, and replacements, the normal replacements of existing infrastructure due to wear and tear. The capacity portion of this would be a basis for future connection fees. The total fund would be divided by the number of units. Commercial units, of course, would be based on the flow projections. This information has been distributed and actually has been discussed at 3 different committees: operations, capital, planning, and finance. So I'm not going to go into it unless there's specific questions by the board. I just wanted to bring it up at this meeting, to basically define the committee's roles. I think that that as we enact new connection fees, that would be definitely something that the finance department or committee would be taken abreast of. Planning would be the overall planning issues of capacity and the overall connections, and of course, the operations capital will be more to date or things that we're doing in the next year. So unless there's I think we've discussed this quite a bit. Unless there's specific questions or anything you'd like me to address, I just wanted to bring it up and state that we would continue to move on this.
Michael, this is Bob. I have one question sort of on the two topics,
Yes, sir?
if I can. I just think the sum of water and irrigation water from all of the bills since May, all the invoices. And it looks to me like irrigation is about 1/3 of total usage. Is that correct?
Yeah, historically, it's between 16 and 20% of all total usage.
So I just looked at all bills since May, and it's 1.4 million units of irrigation and 2.7 million units of water. So based on that, it would seem to me and obviously irrigation is mostly in the dry season, that our main opportunity in managing a crisis would be with irrigation. And then, as Carolyn pointed out, efficient use for people during the winter. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, and that's how the water stage alert system is basically directed.
Okay, thanks.
So on developer connection fees, you're saying that they're going through various committee reviews.
Right, and I just wanted to mention for today that we'll be taking an aggressive look at this and trying to get possible changes done fairly rapidly, because we feel that there's some needs to be equitable between the different funds. Wastewater, as we discussed at our committee meeting, seems to be a little high, while electric possibly is somewhat low.
So I've got one comment and one question. The comment is, and I'll do this for the benefit of the Finance Committee, and your considerations of the connection charges, because I think that's where the connection fees will go. I understand conceptually how all these have been calculated, and I, to expand capacity, base the connection fee based on what's needed to expand our capacity as opposed to replace, repair, maintain, and so on. I think that there are two services that we provide. One is electricity and one is possibly fire protection, where what we are doing or what we plan to do would be not only to simply expand our ability to provide a larger population with these services, but to significantly change the quality of those services as well. So for example, with electricity, I think we all believe that by going to the Out Valley, we are making a qualitative change to the reliability of our system. We're also giving ourselves a much better opportunity to be responsible in how we use energy in carbon-based sources of energy and so on. So the reliability and the environmental impacts are significant reasons why we did the Out Valley. It wasn't just to say we've got to be able to provide 8 or 10 megawatts of power at some point. It was we've got to get off of diesel for various reasons. And I don't think it's particularly fair for current users of electricity to pay for the qualitative change by themselves. So I think that, I personally think the connection charge needs to somehow take into account that qualitative aspect. I don't think that applies to the water. I don't think it applies to the wastewater treatment. It could apply to the fire. I mean, for example, if we were able to drive down the ISO rating a notch by getting better equipment or something, and that we're investing in that, that's something that I would think would be borne by everybody, and including those who come in later and sort of buy into that system. So that's the comment, and again, I don't need to discuss it here, but I just would like that to be at least considered as these charges are considered. The question I have, and it has to do with the documentation that was included in the packet, there's an Exhibit A. Now, I think that's an exhibit to the ordinance. It wasn't an exhibit that was attached to, for example, our APA or anything like that. It's simply, I'm assuming we can modify that exhibit just as much as we can modify the ordinance itself.
Absolutely, I know exactly what you're talking about, and any new ordinance would supersede any previous ordinance, and we certainly can modify.
The principles that are outlined, because that's what that exhibit is Exhibit A outlines certain principles or a structure within which the connection charges would be based. And some of those things would restrict our ability to do some things that are even proposed here in these tables or contemplated in these tables.
Yeah, that Exhibit A is not an agreement with any other third party. It's a board ordinance which could be changed by the board.
Thanks.
On the improvement in quality, it's a good comment. I'm sitting here wondering how we measure it. I don't know how we measure it. I mean, this has been, the initial draft here is based on a whole bunch of numbers. The second thing is that the biggest factor after we build this affecting rates will be load growth. So, I don't think we want to discourage load growth.
Right. No, that's for sure. We want a balanced picture here.
Any comments from any other board members on
Well,
8I?
I guess, every time you describe this, Eric, I get a little bit more understanding of where you're going with that train of logic, but I'm not sure I'm quite there yet. So let me try this just as a test case. Electricity, you're saying that people that come here in the future, that are not here today, that they're going to be occupying as yet undeveloped space, that those people should somehow participate in the cost of creating the out valley connection. So would it be as simple in your mind as if we did the out valley, but we did it in order to support the current capacity, it would have cost X dollars, but we are actually doing it to support a higher level of capacity, and it is costing us Y dollars. So the difference between X and Y could potentially be put into a schedule like this, and we would say that is the portion of the cost of the out valley project that is reasonably, can be reasonably attached to having it operate at a higher level of capacity, and that would become a major input to the connection fee calculation for electricity. Is that kind of how you see this?
Well, that's what Michael's done already. What you've just said is exactly what's in here, and what the calculation comes out to be is, because it doesn't matter whether you're putting in a line for 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts, you still have to dig those trenches, you still have to deal with Caltrans, you still have to do PG&E.
Those are not differential
So it's only
costs.
$1.6 million out of 37.
Then is that in here?
And for me to think that, you know, at build-out, there would be twice as many units of housing as there is today, that those people are only contributing 1.6 million out of 37 million.
Okay, so the
Now,
mechanism-
now that would be, I'm talking about at the extreme, that they all came at the end of our loan period and so on. So, I mean, the way, in my mind, and this isn't new, by the way, I might put this thinking into this discussion 4 years ago, and put it forward to the old board and to Tom and so on. And that is that those people connecting earlier pay a smaller connection fee. Those people connecting later pay a larger connection fee, because they're buying into something that was new, that has been well maintained, that is providing benefits other than simply the capacity to connect. And we never would have built a line, a 5 megawatt line. If we said there will be never be any more growth, we wouldn't have done that. I don't know what we would have done, but we would not have built this out valley line for $37 million or for $35.4 million.
But it's like every commodity, we're building for the ultimate future vision of the valley and doing it at appropriate times, of course, but that's exactly what we did with electricity, and it's exactly what we do with every productive resource that we put in place. We try to look at the ultimate, at where are we today, what do we have to have at full build out, is the smart plan for getting from point A to point B.
Yeah, I'm just saying that people should also pay for the quality they're getting, not just the quantity. That's all.
Well, I can tell you in electricity, we're sure paying for the quality. Because, you know, even to date, there's been a market improvement of quality from that pre-fire woodshed that we were getting brownouts from every week. You know, we don't, the quality's improved, but our rates have gone way up too, because we built a $15 million power plant that we will have as a backup supplier.
Well, I think, in my mind, hearing what you're saying, Eric, it's almost as simple as you're questioning whether $1.6 million is the right number, yea or nay. And whether or not there ought to be another line on there that's something like powerhouse improvements already accomplished, or improvement in reliability of electrical services, and try to attach a number to those items.
Well, it's, the way I think of it is this. I mean, the way we use electricity, we use about, 3,000, 4,000 kilowatt hours a year in our house. Now, once we start paying the rates based on the out valley, about, 25 cents or 27 cents per kilowatt hour is to pay this loan, right? So we're paying for the electricity itself, just as we use it, but we're also paying for the infrastructure that allows us to use that electricity. So I'm paying, someplace between $750,000 a year for that benefit. Now, after 4 or 5 years, that's maybe as much as $5,000. Somebody else comes in, and that $5,000 has gone and paid down a part of that loan. And those people come in and say, thanks very much for the gift. I don't think that's fair.
Bob Epstein, do you have some comments that you'd like to make?
Well, yeah, I mean, because I tried modeling this 3 or 4 years ago when we first set all this up, and people, because this is all debt finance, people pay for it in the debt service and then in the depreciation. Even 35 years from now, there'll be additional debt service and there's lifetimes on things. So I think the primary way people pay for it is by paying their utility bill. It isn't the capital. The capital up front is a very small part of the total, and I don't think there's any way to make it a significant part that would be material to things. So someone who only uses it for 20 years got less service than someone who used it for 35 years, and that's why they're paying somewhat less. So I think the way it's currently structured is both encourages the completion of the master plan and is relatively equitable to the degree to which you can figure that out.
And I would agree with you, Bob, if the plan was not to pay down the debt. But our plan is to pay down the debt.
But he's right that it's a small amount, because let's say the connection fee is, I don't know, I think a few thousand, what are you going to say, make 5,000? I mean, a couple $1,000s from, as I believe you said, there's say 800 more units. That's nothing. It's nothing compared to what we're spending on our debt. It's nothing compared to what you pay in the utility bills, as you just said. So I don't, and you can't say make it 30 or 40 or 50,000. I don't think that's anyone would.
No, but I mean, just as my own calculation was that reasonable, but probably not doable, would be a $10,000 connection fee. I have to mention that, just FYI to the Finance Committee, to Alan Sapp, and he said, I believe he told me he had come up with $12,000 and he thought that was reasonable. And he's a developer in this valley. Now, I was not thinking of that high of a number, and I don't have a calculation.
But we've looked at some comparables, right, Michael? We've looked at what other utility districts charge for connection fees, all their connection fees. So we have some basis of comparison. Care to comment on what you found out as you looked at electrical connection fees from those other districts?
I think most of our data is from water and wastewater. I think we were branching out into electric and propane. I think the comment from electrical and propane that one of the things is that they're really looking for new connections. I mean, they're extremely pro-development, and they're trying not to discourage it, so they might not get the true cost across. Mountain Utilities didn't have hardly any connection fees because they were, trying to get new development going. With water, you see a wide range of different costs based on actual capacity costs. So,
right, electricity is the big rhino here, right? This is where we're spending $35 million on a project that's just completely disproportionate to everything, the scale of everything else in our business. That's the only one that's relevant. So we got to understand what other districts are paying for electrical connection fees as a point of reference.
we have that, I just don't have it here.
So I'll just say, I understand that there needs to be balance. I understand the different pros and cons, and I understand that we do want to expand demand for electricity in order to help pay off this loan. But I just wanted to express that point of view at this point, because I know these things will be considered fairly quickly.
Yeah, 800 connections times $2,500 is $2 million, so that's not insignificant. Just to pick $2,500. Any other comments from the board or audience on something that's close to everybody's heart?
I think it's a good piece of work, Carol, the fact that we've got a sort of a long-term view of how much stuff we have to put in place, and what does that stuff cost to have the infrastructure that is appropriate to the long-term development plans for the
And I would also request that the comparable data be included as we consider this, comparable, what other utilities provide. You know, and your judgment of which outliers to disregard. So that concludes, unless you have anything else on Section 8, Michael, that concludes Section 8. We'll turn to Section 9, Manager's Report.
In your packet, you'll find the February newsletter, the first page. I'd like to thank Cheryl Stern for assisting with putting this together. First page concentrates on the water conservation, as previously mentioned. Next, we get into the new hosted email service that we have, and I actually have a new email address. We've had very good results with that. All of our devices are syncing nicely. My calendar is being shared by various staff. I have more meetings than I ever had before, and we might take out that function. So I think it also talks about new functionality at KMPUD.com, which I'm sure Bob will mention during the committee reports, and a short project update. Also in the packet is the performance reporting. This has gone through and been reported at the various committee levels, and we've been refining this to show various matrices and try to come up with goals to reduce the areas between metered and production. Also, we have on 168 or 169 actually, there is a notification of some changing services, including the Postal Service operations from Kirkwood Mountain Resort. And then finally, there are some special recognition awards from Aqua JPIA that we're in the process of framing these for each of the board members, and those will be delivered at the next board meeting. So that concludes my manager's report.
Any questions for Michael? From the audience? So 8B, Operations Report. Rick, that's you.
Sure. Good morning. For operations, I'm going to start out with snow removal and just give you a quick update. Currently, we have all our snow removal equipment in service at this time, and we've been flexing the staff schedule to accommodate the current storm. And we had staff out there at 2 a.m. in the morning last night just to keep up with it. Hopefully, it continues to snow and doesn't turn to rain, but if any customers or any board members sees an immediate need, we do have our snow removal phone, which is carried by our staff 24/7. The number is 209-256-9121. Again, 256-9121. And please give us a call and let us know what you need. We're more than happy to come out. For ISO, which is not ISO, it's the Insurance Service Office. As you remember, we were inspected and been notified that we will lose our ISO 4 rating unless we do some mitigation to our current operations. And so since the last board meeting, I sent the ISO a letter reflecting that we will be doing what we can to maintain the 4 rating. So that's going to be my project until December, which is the deadline. And so starting through the list, the 3 main areas is communications, operations, and water supply. I looked at communications just to make sure that we got as much credit as possible. And I was under the impression that our dispatch center was an accredited dispatching center, but it is not. They're actually in the process of becoming accredited. And so I'm not sure if they'll be able to complete their accreditation process. It's a 20-point process to do that. And so I probably won't gain any points in that area. And then I'm shifting gears toward the operations level of that survey. And so hopefully by the next board meeting, I can give you a report, kind of some of the areas that we're going to dive into to, again, gain additional points with the ISO. And then finally, with water supply, again, it's a huge lump of it. We've got an excellent water supply system up here, but I'm not sure if we got full credit for what we have. So I'll be working with Plant Superintendent Derek Dornbrook to try to make sure we can capture all the information, the data that they need to get us the points. So unless there's any other questions about the ISO, I'll move on to a couple other items. On January 24th, unfortunately, we had a driver in a pickup truck who was near Meadowstone and Lost Cabin Lodges. He lost control of his vehicle, struck a vehicle along with our fire hydrant, and I believe some of the pictures were sent out to the board. But conveniently, he left his license plate behind, and so when he left the scene, we were able to obtain that. Unfortunately, he continued down Kirkwood Meadows Drive and did a few other things and hit another fire hydrant and completely wiped out the second hydrant. The first hydrant is usable. We've taken apart the 2.5 frame assembly and we can use that hydrant. The second hydrant's located across from Thimblewood underneath the Villas Alta Cerro on Kirkwood Meadows Drive. Fortunately, that hydrant is not in a prime location for operations. We have one really across the street, so it's not something we need to address right now. We definitely need to repair the hydrant. Probably we'll do that this summer. But that hydrant is unusable. We've removed the hydrant. We've made sure we've capped it so it doesn't contaminate our water supply. And so I called CHP. We filed actually 2 property damage reports with CHP, and the report will be picked up on Monday. It's now available. And we will be seeking the driver and the insurance company for the driver to get damages. But yeah, not much fun on that one. Then further on, I've got a couple other things to report to the board. Our district engineer, Matt Wheeler, is continuing to work with the Department of Public Health, Maria Pang, to finalize any of the missing data from the 2013 CIR, or Compliance Inspection Report. And so as we move along there, we're just, again, doing everything we can to provide them with the information and protect our water supply. As for the membranes, they're continuing to work really well, and we're on the 3rd stage of our O&M manual / warranty requirements. And so we're in corresponding with Coke Membranes to make sure they have all the data they need. We know what's expected of us to maintain the warranty. And we have not received the response back from the 3rd clarification memo from Coke. But again, we're very pleased with the way the membranes are performing. Since the last board meeting, we've brought up a company to install some of the other equipment required for the warranty, including the turbidity meter as well as the airflow meters. And we've actually found a new company that is able to compete with another company, Tesco, for doing computer control work at the plant. So we're actually able to, for example, we've got some needs where we need to purchase a couple of VFDs for equipment, and they'll be able to get a second opinion or a second quote for that equipment. So we're very excited to find that company. And then finally, for the board, the operations staff is going to be focusing on the next 2 capital projects. Of course, the water meter AMI project. And just to refresh the board, in October, the board approved the purchase of these water meter flex net system. And again, the project will be funded through a portion of the COP RUS funding. And the intent there was to have a meter charge of $3.30 per meter per month over a 10-year period to pay that off. We've taken this project into 2 phases. Phase 1 is to try to put meters in this winter in conditioned spaces, and we've just received all those meters. It took some time to get those from the meter manufacturer and Golden State Flow Measurement. So when the weather clears up and we have staff available, we'll be going through some of the major commercial buildings such as the Towers, all of Sun Meadows, Base Camp, Timber Ridge, Snowcrest, Meadowstone, the Meadows, and Edelweiss to put in these remote read meters. And then the next stage, of course, would be to go out into the residential and the rest of the valley. And the exciting thing about this project is once we install the meters, they'll become live and active. And with Jill's staff, we can be able to actually start monitoring the water usage as well. So, and then the next and final thing I have is the Loop Road Electrical and Propane Project. As the board's aware, back in April 2012, we had a ground fault between Herkimeus Drive and the transformer behind the youth hostel in Renwick. At that time, we completed phase 1 of the project by replacing that 15 kV line in 3 phases. The next 2 phases of that project will be taking the power line from behind the youth hostel Renwick to the wastewater treatment plant, and then from the wastewater treatment plant up here to the vault adjacent to the vehicle maintenance shop and the oil switch there. In conjunction with that project, we'd also improve our propane system by looping the propane system from the existing location line, which is over here by the vehicle maintenance shop next to this building, and bringing that up to Kirkwood Meadows Drive as well. So staff is reviewing the data that we put together back in 2012, and we'll be bringing it back to the board at the next board meeting to discuss. So unless there's any other questions, that concludes my report for the board.
I thought it was interesting to note in Aqua Magazine that the San Ramon Water District in Dublin just received a citation and an award for doing exactly what we're doing with the water meters.
Oh, really?
For just improving the project. And we've already initiated census and everything, so I thought that was kind of
Call them up and give them the press release.
Well, maybe the communications committee would like to inform Aqua Magazine of some of the things that we're doing.
Or you could write them a letter.
Yeah.
Just say we saw your article and we've done this already. Any other questions for Rick? Comments? Board or audience? Thank you. Randy, you're up. 9C, electric and propane systems.
Good morning. I'd first like to give you a quick update on the powerhouse, and then we'll move into the power quality update and generator testing. So over the last month...
Brandy, I can't hear you at all.
You can sit there.
Just
Yeah, sit there.
Oh, here.
Hey,
All right.
go ahead, make a motion or two. She's going to sit in your seat, Bob.
Sit in your seat, Bob. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can sense your presence.
All right. So we've had a few generator issues over the last month. The major one is generator number 4. We've had a warranty issue with a charge air cooler, which cools the air from the turbos. Power Secure is handling this repair under warranty through Valley Power out of Sacramento. Unfortunately, the part was quite a ways out when it was ordered. We're expecting that repair to happen the last week in February. So number 4 is one of the Volvos. It is remaining down, but all of the rest of the issues we've experienced with an ammonia leak and an alternator belt tensioner have been taken care of in-house, so we have every generator up except for number 4. As far as our power quality update goes, we have installed power quality meters at the lower shop, the Meadows, and Chair 7. Those are installed, but in order to get the most useful data off of those meters, we're going to need to send staff out with a laptop to each of the 3 locations several times a day for about a week. And the most useful information will come when all the lifts are operating. So we've delayed that data gathering until hopefully next weekend. If the resort is able to open the rest of their chairlifts, we'll do that data gathering at that time. And once we gather all the data, that'll be sent over to Exponential, who will do data analysis for us and tell us if there's a power quality problem, and if so, what the extent of that is and what we or our customers can do to help fix that problem.
So I know Casey's hoping to open the backside, but if it doesn't happen, what's your point of view?
We would need to discuss and possibly get board direction, because with only a few lifts operating, we're not sure if it is useful to move forward now, or if we would need to delay until the beginning of next season.
And we have to keep what, this rental gear, so we have to keep it.
We actually ended up going a different direction. We purchased the meters and replaced the ones we had, so.
No cost implications, we decided to delay.
Nope, just a delay.
Bob, I'm confident that next weekend, even without the backside open, that we'll be able to collect useful data with the remaining lifts open. So,
Just judging by the parking lot today, you're probably going to have the highest usage of the year today.
Good.
You're optimistic.
It's been quite good
Climbing
traffic.
the lower parking lot here, I guess there must be thousands of people queuing
It's
up
been
to
quite
climb over the
a
fence.
string of cars going through the last 2 hours.
I did just get an update from the powerhouse. We're over 2 megs, which puts us, if not the highest day of the year, very close.
Whoa, there's lines. Jesus.
Yeah, it's happening. They're here today.
February 8th.
Better late than never.
Another topic that we are working on in electric and propane is our annual emissions test for the generators. We did the RADA test last year, actually twice, in order to get our permit to operate, which was quite expensive. Each RADA cost approximately $19,000, and we had to rent a load bank for both of those tests. We have proven to Great Basin Air Board that we have very low emissions, and our data has been very good for the year. So they have approved our request to substitute a cylinder gas audit. It's a much shorter test that doesn't require a specific generator load to perform. We have a current estimate of $7,500 to do that test by Horizon, and there would be no load bank. So we're moving forward with that test plan. We'll be submitting official test plans to Great Basin within the next few weeks, and we hope to do this test end of March, early April. And then lastly, I wanted to let the board know that we have been working with Exponential to drill down the types of O&M and emergency services that we will need from an outside contractor on the Out Valley line. That's the one area where we would like to move forward and get a real comfort level with our contractor that's chosen for things like annual maintenance, power downs in a snowstorm, and that sort of thing. So we're working on a request for proposal, and we're expecting to get that out in April to a list of contractors in the area. Any questions?
So we would contract for Out Valley maintenance services.
The majority of it, yes. There are some maintenance items that can be done in-house, but since it's a higher voltage line, we would need a contractor with journeyman linemen to do a lot of maintenance. Fortunately, there's not a ton of annual maintenance that needs to be performed, especially in the underground.
yes, Standards, the majority of the maintenance that's going to be needed is observation, which we could do in-house. It would be the actual maintenance of the equipment or emergency repairs that we would be going out for outside service.
Okay. Any questions on the electricity and propane reports, either from the board or audience?
Any outages during the past month? That's very nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's related here, but I just forwarded Michael and the rest of the board an email from Sandy Goldberg showing the propane meter reading she had on Sunday was a big
There's a
one.
little story there that we'll get to. We
Okay.
can do it now, but.
Oh, no, we'll do it later. But, go ahead. Well,
It's a good story.
so 9D, administrative report.
Thank you, Becky. Are you going to be loud and sit over here?
I can talk.
Yeah.
Good morning, morning. I'll start with the December financials. They're starting on page 176 with the balance sheet for December. We show our operating cash at about $2.2 million, which is $692,000 over plan. As discussed at the last board meeting, the main reason for this is due to the rest interest expense. We budgeted to pay all of that out of operating funds, and we're actually capitalizing any interest for the Out Valley project. Another reason is you can see under current assets, other, our total accounts receivable balance is under plan. Our year-to-date revenues are down about $63,000 from plan, but the remaining of the accounts receivables variance actually helps our operating cash.
How much interest did we capitalize? Do you know? We're expecting to, right?
I'll get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Our accounts payable balance is over plan by $283,000. The reason for that is that our December diesel and propane invoices were paid in January, leaving a higher balance. Are there any other questions on the balance sheet? We'll go ahead and go to our income statement. The combined income statement is on page 178, and December actually did quite well, especially considering the lack of snow. Our operating revenues were down $82,000 from plan, but our operating expenses were also down $71,000 from plan. So total operating, our net loss would be about $10,000. But if you look under non-operating revenues, there's $40,000 in there. Under other, that's our greenhouse gas credit, which makes our bottom line better for December. Our net income is $254,000, which is about $30,000 better than planned. Leaving our year-to-date revenues down $62,000 from plan, and our overall year-to-date net loss is $319,000, which is right on plan, $5,000 over plan. A couple notes on the individual income statements. Page 183 is the water income statement, and our revenues are up for December and year-to-date. For December, operating revenues are up $12,500 due to us putting the usage charge in water. And our operating expenses are down $2,000, leaving December better than planned by $15,000. And our year-to-date net loss is $30,000 better than planned. For wastewater, revenues for December are also up $12,500. That's due to us increasing rates by 3.5%. Our operating expenses are also down. So our net loss for wastewater in December is $21,000, which is $36,000 better than planned, leaving our year-to-date net loss in wastewater $99,000 better than planned. We get to electric on page 186, and for December our revenues were down. They were down $96,000 from plan, with operating expenses also down $11,000 from plan, but under the non-operating we do show the $40,000, which is mainly the greenhouse gas credit. So for December our net loss is about $45,000 worse than planned, but we did not have to allocate any property taxes to electric for December, even with the loss, because Russ reports on calendar year, and our calendar year we met our tier ratio without it. So for year-to-date electric is 230,000 better than planned, and that's due to property taxes from July to November being allocated there. My last is propane on page 189. Operating revenues were down a little bit for December, down by 9,000. With a net income for December of 98,000, which is 6,000 better than planned. Year-to-date, we are still down a little bit. Our year-to-date net income for propane is 8,200, which is 21,000 down from plan. Are there any questions on December financials?
No, I just like to say congratulations to staff for what looks to me to be really good financial management. It's terrific that we're having the season that we're having, and yet we're doing okay.
Cutting expenses as much as we can. On page 191 of the packet is the operating cash waterfall. It shows that our operating cash at the end of January was $2,110,000. That's down 79,000 from plan. That's due to us budgeting for the first part of property taxes being received in January, and we actually received that check last week from Alpine for about $400,000. So we adjusted our February number. January is expected to be our lowest cash for the remainder of the year.
So I have a question, which is my usual question, and that is, the cash waterfall shows a 1,882 in December cash balance. Financials showed 2,187, which is 305,000 higher. And I think you told me at the finance committee meeting that that's because PCS assumes you collected cash when one of the transactions goes through, and the cash waterfall is actually a bank balance. How does that work? I was trying to think about your answer, meaning you debit accounts receivable, credit revenue. Why does PCS assume you've collected the cash when you haven't collected it?
The way their accounts receivable works, the day that we close the month, even though if we don't do billing until January 3rd, and we've received payments from the first few days the next month, the day that we close the period, even though we've received cash in those 3 days, it's counting it as the previous month billing cycle. So, and sometimes the main reason for that is our ACH. We collect the money for accounts receivables on the due date, and because we do the due date 30 days out from the day that we mail,
Okay.
sometimes the due date isn't
So you're collecting a lot of money in the first couple of days of January for December.
right. And PCS will show that
As collected.
as
So
collected.
it's probably not as much of a vulnerability as I'm worried about. Okay. Any other questions from the board or the audience on financial report?
We used to cover account close-offs, and did that go to the consent calendar? So did I ask a question about that without getting in trouble, or is that okay?
As long as you don't change it.
You can ask as many questions as you
It
want.
seemed like there were a larger number of accounts that were open. It seemed to ask that question, or I just forgot what it was.
We've actually gotten that down quite a bit in the last couple of months. I think that customers are starting to understand that we've gone to a 30-day.
Okay, no further questions, that's fine.
It's fairly big numbers though, because of the month of the season, right? There's some big bills.
$30,000 would be, yeah, just more curious about the number of delinquent accounts, close to the amount of accounts. Okay.
We still only have 2 locked off accounts, which is our main issue, if they don't pay within 60 days.
Thanks.
A couple other little things I'd like to address is an update on our audit RFP. We did send out requests for proposals in the beginning of January to see if we could get some other accounting firms in there. We sent 7 different companies requests for proposals, and we made contact with all of them this week. We did receive confirmations from 3 companies, Bollinger, BKT, and Moss Adams, that we definitely will be receiving a proposal from them by the end of this month. We're asking for them to be here by March 1st. We received a definite no from Dreyer and Kelso and Schmidt and Company, and we have 2 possibilities still out there, Blodgett Mickelson and AKT, which is our current. We still need to make contact with AKT to make sure that they're okay with us still going out and that we do want them to resubmit. Are there any questions on that? Finally, it's time to start thinking about budget again. So just a quick budget timeline. At the next meeting, March 8th, we'll be presenting assumptions and initial projections for 1 and 5 year and capital budget with input from that. At the April board meeting, we'll present the overall budget template and a 1-year income statement and any revised projections. Then on the May 10th board meeting, it'll be our first draft of the overall budget with a balance sheet and our 5-year cash waterfall. The goal is to have more of a 5-year budget in place than a 1-year in May, with final draft being presented on June 14th. And that's all I have.
And I said to Jill, I hope you can make that schedule. Jill said, I'm going to make it. So I take that as Jill and Michael's commitment.
Yes.
Any questions of Jill on any of these topics? Okay, so committee reports, communications.
Thanks, Dennis. Couple of things I want to focus on. One is obviously we have made a lot of progress on the website and the revised billing systems. This month we want to transition to One Call Now, so it works through our own facilities, and that would allow people to sign up for messaging that could either come through email, text message, or text to voice automatically translated. We would integrate that so various things that could be valuable to the homeowner can be automatically either routed to staff first or routed to staff and our customer, not just homeowners, at the same time. And Bob, I don't know if you want to talk for a minute about our recent success in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm the person least qualified to talk about this because I just joined the communications committee, and the work that got done on online metering is really what needs to be recognized here. But as Sandy said, the Goldbergs had a situation. Sandy Goldberg had never used the metering before, and she signed on Thursday, and she was looking at the graphs, and she said, that's really odd. I show propane used on Sunday, but I got nothing on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. How could that be? And she thought about it for a while and thought, crap, that probably means that my heater isn't working. So she called me up, and I listened to this, and I thought, geez, I don't know, maybe the data didn't get loaded or something. I tried to get a hold of Bob and didn't get him live, and then I thought, well, I'll go onto the system and look and see if I had any usage on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I did. So I, ran up to Sandy's house and let myself in and found that sure as heck her furnace had failed. And I tried to restart it, it wouldn't stay lit. The igniter was bad, and her house is already down to 34 degrees. So she was about this close to having a freeze in the house. So I did a standard winterization drill with an antifreeze and flushing the toilets and opening the taps and blah, blah, blah. So that got taken care of. I think the good news here is damn sure the system did work. A real user was able to understand that something was going wrong at the house and was able to take action that probably saved them a water disaster. So kudos to the team for putting something in place that really delivered observable value.
It would have been the second water
That would have been their second go around, yeah.
Gosh.
So they've been real happy with that.
Right. So Zach sort of gives us even more motivation to get the rest of this done. And lack of propane usage will probably be another alert that we will add in that I hadn't thought about before. We have about 160 people that have registered at the website so far, which is pretty dismal. But that's our next step, is to really encourage that. I also, related to this and finance, I did a little bit of math and looked at how many accounts are delinquent at least half the time. So in the 19 payments, which we've done under the new system, we have 22 accounts that are at least delinquent more than half the time, and 45 accounts that are delinquent at least 25% of the time. So that meant they were delinquent 5 times in 19 payments. So it's obviously in our interest, but it's also in the customer's interest to move to be able to do automatic deductions. And the way that works is you get notified of your bill amounts on the early part of the month, typically before the 4th, and then the money is withdrawn on the very last day of the month, so you have plenty of time to look at it, and if you disagree with the bill, to stop payment or to figure out what it is. So we're exploring various ways of trying to get more people to sign up for that, because it will shorten our receivables. As people noticed, it'll also, it's easier on us, and it's ultimately easier on the customer, or they won't do it. So that's the other discussion that we're having in communications, and sort of overlaps with finance, which is how to get more people to sign up for electronic, and then also to do the automatic payments. And I think those are the highlights. We're also preparing to support the volunteer fire department's activities again for the June or July event, and that's most of it.
Any questions for Bob? Planning?
Planning, we, of course, been spending time on capacity study and power purchase agreement. Those have already been covered in the meeting so far. The third topic is employee housing. We've kind of refocused on this after our long and twisted path on Mellow Roots, so we're back to employee housing. I wrote down some points that describe our interest in the employee housing space, and went before TriTac yesterday to publicly communicate those. I think largely what we were advocating is a switch from the existing deed restriction, swap and trade kind of model to one that is based solely on in lieu fees. And obviously the difficult point on this is in 2 parts. One is getting the people who we think should pay the fees to pay the fees. That's a KCP topic specifically. And secondly is if we want to make a change to the ordinances that control this, it gets wrapped around the axle of 3 counties and 3 planning commissions and so on. So there's some practical stuff there, as well as just reaching a conceptual agreement on how we're going to fund employee housing improvements responsibly as we go forward. So we'll continue to work away at this. More than happy to report on it more extensively at any appropriate time, but it's where a lot of our focus will be.
Any questions?
Hang in there.
I've seen your memos going back, and you missed some time on this topic. They're still relevant.
Glad I'm not on the planning committee. So, Finance Committee.
Hello again. So the 2 things I want to mention that we're already covered that finance is working on. One is encouraging staff and working with staff to do modeling for various outcomes that might happen with this winter and then going into next year. And our main goal is to make sure that in all cases we have a plan to cover our loan covenants and to be able to manage rates and be proactive in knowing what might happen. And the good news in that front is this year, even if it hadn't snowed leading up to this meeting, we would still have the resources to cover all of our loan obligations. We're also starting, as Joe mentioned, on the budgeting process to look at some of the modeling for the budget, so that will require a fair amount of time. And then probably in March or April, we'll work out the final loan drawdown strategy for the Russ loan. And that's it.
Any questions about finance? And operations capital?
I think Randy and Rick touched on just about everything we discussed except for one item, and that was the committee recognized Carolyn Scott for her continued active participation. So,
Thank you, Caroline.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the recognition. It was really fun.
Okay.
I'm going to hang it up in my condo.
And last but not least, personnel. We had a meeting recently, a couple weeks ago, and focused on 3 things that I remember. One is general manager's objectives for this year, and Michael's made very good progress on most of them, and we think is in with it, and it's very reasonable to assume you can accomplish most of them this year.
Yeah, the ones that might not be accomplished would be purely
Budget.
financial or budget concerns. By the way, I don't know, I think that our joint evaluation should probably show up in the board packet next time,
Okay.
just so that people see, each committee can see what our evaluation is.
Right. That was more of a self-evaluation, don't you think? With which we agreed.
Well, yeah, I mean, Michael put forward his
Right.
thoughts, and we pretty much agreed.
And then secondly, to understand our CalPERS liabilities, which are significant and hard to understand actually at this point. And then finally, I think we discussed reducing some staffing levels given our lower revenue this year, and proceeded with those based on the lower revenue, but also that there would be actions we'd have to take probably in November. Anything you'd add?
No, it's a good summary.
So general discussion. This is an opportunity for board members to ask questions for clarification, provide information to staff, committee updates, request staff to report back on a matter, or direct staff to place a matter on a subsequent agenda. I think, well, that's for board members. Is Cheryl take off?
Yes, sure.
So I think we wanted to mention that the Meet the Candidates meeting has been moved from today to March 8th, from 3 to 5 p.m. or 2 to 5 p.m.?
2 to 5, and we're hoping for the March 8th date, but that has been canceled due to the weather.
Right. Any other general discussion topics?
Yeah, I've got a couple. It occurs to me that the board package is getting pretty immense. There's a lot of reference materials and whatnot. Does it make sense to do some of that stuff as appendices rather than including them in the main package, just for purposes of getting through it conveniently on a computer as you're doing it? There's value in that idea. I give it to you. It seems like it might make some sense. Like all the power purchase agreement stuff. There's like 70 pages of that stuff, right?
Sure.
It could be stuff down here as a reference document or something. Just
Yeah, and the board president and I have actually talked about utilizing a service like Dropbox in the future as well that could help with reducing the amount of the board packets in the future. So, good suggestion.
Second one is, I just wanted to say, I think, we've in this employee housing space, we've talked a couple of times about the possibility of using an HUD structure, assuming that's housing and urban development, if that's the same as the federal acronym. And I think, since we're getting into the employee housing topic, quite deliberately at this point, it makes sense to understand whether or not there are, just what's the landscape look like? Are there advantages or things we ought to know about in an HUD structure as a possible tool to use in our efforts to do right by the valley's needs in building housing? So I propose we add that to the planning committee's list of tasks. Of course, it's the right place to deal with it.
And related to that, perhaps the planning committee could take up and be sort of definitive about who should be involved in this effort. Is there still a subcommittee or not, et cetera?
Well, at least my thought on that would be, like with the Mello-Roos, I'd love to have a periodic update either from Michael or from the planning committee on where we are on that stuff. Because you said that we're swapping deed restrictions for fee in lieu of. Well, I don't know what a fee in lieu of is, so it would be great to.
I think a brief tutorial at the next staff meeting would be entirely appropriate, and or
board meeting.
What did I say?
Staff meeting.
Yeah, board meeting.
We did it. We got periodic updates on the Mello-Roos thing, not because we tried to, but because we started and then stopped and started and stopped. So.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got the memo I presented to the TriTag yesterday. Why don't I spend a couple of minutes with you at convenience to kind of, give you a run through what the terms are, and it'll help. And we'll do a briefing next time.
Okay. Any other general discussion? Michael?
One subject has come up that's come up in the past, and that is public participation on committee and board meetings via teleconference. And this is a subject that has come up a few years ago. We had a participant that wanted to call into our planning committee meeting. I recommended, and Chairman Amdy allowed that to happen, but as a general board policy, we have not allowed that in the past. I just wanted to bring it up for board discussion.
And I ask that you try to put some dollars and cents around that as well as just, it's not just philosophical discussion. We got to have a conference bridge. We got to potentially pay money, right?
Right.
How much money do we pay?
I got that request, but actually I have not done that yet, but hey.
It was yesterday afternoon at
I-
5 o'clock. My God, shit.
Get on it.
What was that last comment?
Yeah. Censor.
Yeah, I would frankly be inclined not to have it for the board meeting, because these things go on long enough anyway. It seems to me, in the past, when I've not been on the board and had a comment, it's incumbent on me to show up for it. And third, you don't really know what kind of, who's out there, basically. But I did talk to Michael about the committee chairman having the option of allowing it. I know in finance, if we didn't allow it, Nate wouldn't call in, and we're all calling in anyway, so those are my thoughts, is that at the committee level, if it weren't automatically allowed, at least the committee chairman could permit it. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I just don't think there's that much volume. People aren't rushing to come to these committee to participate. And I was actually thrilled that the person who participated in the planning was interested enough to call in. So I thought it was a good sign, actually.
Yeah, I think we should encourage it because it makes it easier for people to participate. And it's always been an issue in the past, trying to get participation over an extended period of time.
Right.
I think it de facto creates a feeder pool for future committee members as well. Find people that are interested, that have an opinion, that are up to speed on the topics. How bad can that be?
So do we want to just allow people to call into committee meetings? Is that the consensus?
I would think so. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that. And then if for some reason all of a sudden 5 or 10 people are trying to call into every committee meeting and it's going to really cost some money, then I think we should probably reconsider it.
Okay.
It's good.
So you don't need a resolution or anything, you just need
It's a consensus.
Consensus.
Yeah.
Any other business? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Parking cars down in the middle lot now. That's good sign.
Thank you, Bob.
What a
Thanks, Bob.
too, boy.
Harder to see out there.
Yeah, the visibility is really getting bad.
It was revised.
Oh, okay.
had to get
Bottom line was pretty close.
Where you going,
Right, I have to do some signing some stuff.
Chains.
So it's not closed?
What?
I assume the spur is not closed.
Right, it says
It
chains.
sounded like they were shooting it this morning.
Yeah.
Bob, I'll be right back. Just the restroom.
Yeah.